Welcome to the 2020 New York State DEC Cornell Cooperative Extension Special Permit Training. My name is Dan Donahue from Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. My colleagues in putting this training together are Christy Hoepting of the Cornell Vegetable Program in Western New York, Libby Einshaller of the New York State Northwestern New York Dairy and Livestock Team, my colleague in the East, Mike Basedow at Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture, Janet Van Zoeren, who's an Integrated Pest Management Specialist with the Lake Ontario Fruit, and finally, Associate Dean Julie Suarez. We're happy to be bringing you this training this year once again. We believe this is the 21st season. We are doing it as a distance learning activity since the current coronavirus situation prevents us from having large public meetings, and we need to honor our restrictions on social distancing. Here's some faces to put with the names. You're all very familiar to us. We put on this training for approximately 103 farms across the state. Please contact your local extension specialist if you have any additional questions. New York State DEC special permits. The special permit allows a non-certified applicator to handle 10 federally restricted use pesticides that are listed specifically on the permit. What holding this permit does is it relieves the requirement for on-site direct supervision of non-certified applicators when applying these federally restricted use materials. Current New York State regulations define direct supervision as voice to ear without the assistance of radios or cell phones. Hence, we in New York State offer this additional training and permitting process in order to satisfy state requirements. There are 10 very specific federal restricted use pesticides on the special permit document. DuPont Lanate, Lorsban Advanced, Agrimec, Danitol, Mustang Max, DuPont Asana, Warrior, Indigo, Leverage, and Besiege. You are only allowed as a special permit applicator to apply these specific materials. Supervisors should know that generic formulations of these active ingredients are not allowed under the special permit. You may note that dropped for this year is Gramoxone. Gramoxone no longer can be applied unless the applicator has a full certification. Also, another change is with Lorsban. Lorsban is only allowed a single trunk application to apples by a special permit holder. In order to obtain the special permit, the applicant must have either taken this training in 2019 and passed the exam, or must sit for this training video and then pass the written exam. 20 multiple choice questions. The minimum score is 70%. That is 14 correct answers out of 20. What's the future of special permit training? We fully expect that this will be the last year of special permit training. New federal regulations eliminate the legal basis for special permits. New York State DEC is in the process of rewriting certification and training regulations in New York. Once that process is complete, which we expect most likely by the end of this year, we will have something different for the 2021 season. Ideally, we will have New York State regulations that allow for electronic forms of communication. Stay tuned. The training methods used this year, and most importantly, the paperwork is much different than we've experienced in the past. The supervising certified applicator has substantial responsibilities in this process. As the supervisor, you are responsible for the paperwork being completed correctly, for the training being administered properly, the integrity of the testing maintained, and that all signed documentation be sent to the local DEC representative in your region. The first document that I want to bring to your attention is the roster and affidavit. Every farm receives one roster and affidavit. That roster lists all the employees of that farm who expect to become qualified for special permit in 2020. Please note that the column on the left side of the document states whether the training video portion of this process is required. Training needed, no. If the employee does not require additional training, that means that they held a 2019 special permit and passed the written exam last year. Those individuals listed on the roster do not need to take the Cornell training modules, that is the rest of this video. They do have to read and understand the Lohr's Band Advanced and Gramoxone label information on the roster, and they must use either cell phones or two-way radios when out spraying in order to effectively communicate with the certified supervising applicator. Next up is for those students, those applicants that require training. On the roster, it would indicated by yes, training is required. These applicants either had never taken SBT training, so they're completely new to the program, or they took SBT training in the past but failed the exam, or they had taken and successfully completed SBT prior to 2019. In the case of these trainees, they must take this full training video, which runs approximately 3.5 hours, and must pass the written exam. All special permit applicants, upon either reading these statements, that is the 2019 permit holders, or completing the training module and written exam, which would be the new applicants, must sign the roster, date the roster for the date of the training. All trainees have to be trained, but it doesn't have to be at the same time, particularly with concern to social distancing regulations. It's highly likely that you will be administering either the training and the document signing to each applicant on an individual basis, and that is okay. We expect that. Once the roster is complete, that is, all of your applicants for your farm have completed the training, seen the video when necessary, passed the test when necessary, at least took the test when necessary, and have signed the roster, then the supervisor signs the affidavit at the bottom of the roster. This attests to the integrity of the process. Please read the document carefully because you are liable for this. Once the roster is complete, once all employees have been trained, all special permits signed, all tests completed where necessary, then the final step is to submit the roster to the local regional DEC representative. The address is found at the bottom of the roster form. The special permit application itself is a separate document. It is customized for each of the applicants that were listed on that roster. You will find one of these applications for each 2019 special permit holder and each of the new trainees for which you requested a permit. On the special permit application for each trainee or returning special permit holder, please complete the date of training field. Have the special permit applicant sign and date the special permit, and the supervisor then signs and dates the special permit. The special permit application is then submitted to the DEC, local regional DEC rep, as soon as possible. Please include the written exam at the same time if the exam was required. It's important to get this paperwork completed and processed by the DEC representative as quickly as possible. But again, the roster document we spoke about earlier needs to be sent in at the end of the process when all training is complete. With that, we'll move on to generally supervising certified applicator responsibilities. You're required to supervise trainees while they watch the educational models in the WPS video, and also supervise trainees as they write the exam, and also then complete the paperwork as specified. Written instructions have also been provided with the package of documents you have received via email. Responsibilities of the certified applicator include fulfilling all requirements of the worker protection standard here, including central notification and posting. Explain the PPE requirements by the label for all the pesticides applied. Provide personal protective equipment as required. And if there's a respirator required, it must be worn, even if it's in a spray-safe cab. And of course, just a reminder of respirator fit test requirements. And be certain to use correct filters and cartridges on the respirators. Provide relevant safety information, restricted entry intervals. And of course, if applying skull and crossbone materials, which are the most toxic, monitor the applicator every 2 hours by sight or voice. Lanate is an example of this material. Provide decontamination supplies. Provide oral warnings and post-treated areas as indicated on the label. Confirm that all the chemicals used in a tank mix are labeled for use on the target crop and within the allowable pre-harvest interval. Maintain the proper calibration of spray equipment and provide tank mix instructions, including a list of the products to be applied, the amounts to measure for each tank, and what order to mix the materials and any necessary adjuvants. Review all precautionary statements with the special permit holder prior to the application. Provide the pesticide label for all materials that incorporated into the tank mix. And always have transportation available to a medical facility if needed. And of course, report any spills or accidents. Remember what was new in 2018, the agricultural exclusion zone. So if any person enters the 100-foot exclusion zone of an air blast application, the applicator must shut down immediately. The restriction is 25 feet when making a ground application, such as a herbicide application. Special use permits do not allow for application of pesticides through irrigation systems, aerial applications, commercial applications, soil fumigation, or the application of federal restricted use pesticides not covered in this training. Finally, the label is the law, and you as a supervising certified applicator are responsible that the label, therefore the law, is followed. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and my colleagues will follow with the remainder of the training. If you have any questions, please contact your local regional Cornell Cooperative Extension specialist. This website here provides additional training materials. Thank you very much.
Integrated pest management, also known as IPM, is a sustainable approach to managing pests by viewing the managed system as an ecosystem, which is basically a community of organisms interacting with each other and with their environment. The goal is to manage pests to keep them below an acceptable level. So potentially harmful species may continue to exist as long as they do not reach the level whereby they cause economic damage. IPM is an interdisciplinary approach, making use of all the potential management tools available to a grower. It also requires a basic understanding of a lot of different things, including the pest biology, different management options available, environmental factors, the weather, and many other potential variables. IPM practitioners often think of IPM tactics in terms of a pyramid. At the bottom of this pyramid are the cultural control methods. These are things like site selection, using clean plants, and also choosing different varieties of plants that are maybe less susceptible to insect or disease pests. The next level is physical controls, things like sanitation, like improving the air movement in order to decrease humidity, and also possibly exclusion, things like using netting or bagging to keep the pests out. The next tactic would be biological control. So after implementing cultural and physical control methods, the next step would be to use natural enemies or biopesticides to help control a pest. And finally, at the top of this pyramid are chemical controls, which in order to use proper IPM tactics would be to make the best selection of the pesticide that you can to get the most effective control and also to improve spray coverage. And so that's where we'll be focusing this training. There are 5 specific steps to implementing the integrated pest management plan. First is to establish a monitoring plan. This is a method whereby you go out and count the number of pests present, whether it's just by looking for things like aphids or other small insects in the tips or the growing tissues of the leaves, or whether it's setting out a trap. It's important to have a plan for how you will monitor for each pest. Then setting goals. In IPM, this is typically called pest thresholds. This would be where you know ahead of time a number generally based on scientific research, which is the number of pests that you can handle in the ecosystem without causing economic damage, and the point where it's worth applying some sort of a pesticide or control method to manage that pest population. The next step is to develop resources, keep a detailed map of where pests are found on each specific orchard, and to have literature available to tell you more about the pests that you might be finding in your cropping system. The next step is to get out there and do that monitoring. So go out, look for insect pests, look for diseases, things like that. And finally, the final step would be to make pest management decisions using all of the information that you gathered in the previous 4 steps. Some common pests of apple, for example, in New York, different diseases that you might find include apple scab, fire blight, black rot, bitter rot, white rot, powdery mildew, fly speck, sooty mold, or cedar apple rust. Some common insects that you might find would include apple maggot, woolly apple aphid, European red mite, codling moth, oblique banded leaf roller, plum curculio, rosy apple aphid, and San Jose scale. And these are just the most commonly found insects and diseases. There's many more that you might find. Really, the takeaway message here is that this is a very complex system and does require a lot of information and understanding to be able to correctly identify and understand how to manage these different pest species. And then on top of that, there are a number of invasive pests that are coming in. So an example of that would be the spotted lanternfly. This is an invasive plant hopper that's native to China, India, and Vietnam. It was originally found in Pennsylvania in 2014, and now has been found in 13 counties in southeastern Pennsylvania, which are now under quarantine. In the state of New York, in 2018, spotted lanternfly eggs were first found in Albany, Chemung, Monroe, Suffolk, and Yates counties. And they were thought to be hitchhikers, so they weren't thought to have established a population in New York at the time. However, this is basically a warning to be aware that there are new things moving in. So although you might be aware of the common pests that have been found in your cropping system in the past, there's always the potential for a new invasive to come in. And then on top of those diseases and insect pests, there's also common weeds. So again, in the example of an apple orchard, you might find grasses, broadleaves, vines, different annuals, and some very problematic perennials like field bindweed. In order to apply a chemical control, the first step is to know specifically which material can be applied in which situation. And this is where the label comes into play, which we'll talk about a lot more in coming parts of this presentation. But for each insecticide, there is a specific host or hosts which are allowed to be applied to. So for this example, it would be allowed to be applied in an apple orchard. There's also specific pests which can be managed with each specific insecticide. So maybe you are looking to manage plum curculio or apple maggot, and you would need that to be on the label for the specific chemical which you're hoping to use or thinking about using. And then there also needs to be the correct environment and timing in order for it to be effective. So the plant, the host plant, and the pest both need to be at the right life stage in order for that chemical to be as effective as possible. In addition, when deciding which chemical control to use in any given situation, it's important to look at the ERAC or FRAC number. And these are giving information about the mode of action. So why is mode of action so important anyways? Basically, the idea behind this is that different insecticides or fungicides work on specific pathways on that insect or disease. And if two different insecticides work on the same pathway, and they are applied back to back, then it is more likely that the insect will develop resistance to that specific mode of action. You can think of resistance as being similar to when we talk about bacteria developing antibiotic resistance if you take too many antibiotics without needing to, or also how we develop resistance to certain diseases like the flu by taking the vaccine, or by getting chickenpox when you're young and not being susceptible to it later on. So if you apply two different insecticides with the similar mode of action back to back, then some of those insects or diseases may become resistant or develop resistance to that insecticide or fungicide, and it will no longer be as effective of a control method. For example, with this particular insecticide, Warrior 2, is in the group 3, which is, as you can see in the background here, it is closely related to the pyrethroids or perrethrins. Group 3, sodium channel modulator. As an example of a specific pest and crop system, looking here at apple maggot. So the first step would be to identify the pest. Here you can see what an apple maggot looks like. You can see a monitoring trap that someone might use to attract and trap apple maggots in order to find out when the first one is flying in the orchard. And you can also see some damage. You need to understand when that pest might be active. So with apple maggot, they migrate into orchards in early July. So that would be a good time to start setting out traps a little bit before that and to start monitoring and thinking about it. There's a picture of the damage, the tunneling into the fruit. Again, monitoring using these red sticky sphere traps. And then you need to know a threshold like we talked about before. With apple maggot, it's 5 flies per trap. So if you're only catching 4 flies per trap, that's a low enough level that it's not causing significant economic damage. It's not worth applying that pesticide. But once it reaches 5 flies per trap, that's when it's important to apply a pesticide and control that pest population. And some control methods, again, working our way up that IPM pyramid, starting with cultural controls, things like removing alternate hosts. And then once you get to the top of the pyramid, if that doesn't work, you could try using chemical controls. And in this particular example, a great way to use an IPM practice when you're applying chemical controls is to treat only the edges because the flies come in from outside of the orchard. This is all information that your supervisor will probably know most of this background information about when and how to apply a specific pesticide. However, understanding how they are making these decisions and being able to help with scouting, monitoring traps, and making decisions will be helpful for you moving forward. So the goal of this training is really to teach you when and how to use these pesticide materials safely.
Welcome to Sprayer Safety and Technology. The commonly used sprayers in orchards are the air blast sprayer, used to spray in 3 dimensions, covering the trees well so the pesticides work effectively. The low pressure herbicide boom sprayer, which is used to apply herbicides in a strip under the trees. And of course, the granular herbicide applicator used for materials such as casseron, applying in a strip under the tree. We must be concerned about contamination of the people and the area around the sprayer. And this can happen when you're loading the sprayer, when you're handling spray brooms and nozzles, contaminated clothing being inside tractor cabs, contaminating the inside of the cab, contamination from spray drift, if you spray moves off target, contamination from cleaning the sprayer after use. All these situations need to be avoided at all times. Another area of concern is pesticide drift in orchards. When we use the sprayer out in the orchard or in a crop field or in a vegetable field, we want to get the pesticide on the target, that is on the plant and on the pest, not outside of the field in the surrounding area. Droplet size is a factor here. The influence of droplet size, smaller equals more drift. So the larger droplet, the less drift. The lighter, smaller droplets can be caught in the air currents and taken away from, carried away from the target. Nozzle type and size is a factor. Again, the nozzle type and size can determine the droplet size, and the smaller the droplet, the more drift potential. The design of the sprayer. For instance, modern orchard sprayers for high density plantings can be covered sprayers that are fully enclosed and greatly reduce the potential for off-target drift. Sprayer calibration is important. You must be putting the correct amount of material out of the sprayer. And of course, weather. There's a large difference between spraying at a 3-mile-an-hour breeze and spraying in a 20-mile-an-hour breeze. To minimize spray drift in orchards, you must stay alert while you're spraying. Many times particularly when we're spraying in orchards in the spring and we have to get that scab spray on, we may be in the tractor for 12, 14 hours at a time. I've done this myself. 2 o'clock in the morning and you've been spraying for 10 hours. It's very, very hard to keep your attention on what you're doing, but you have to pay attention. Ensure the spray pressure remains correct in your rig. Maintain a constant ground speed. If you drop below your target speed, you will put more pesticide on than you planned. If you go faster than your target speed, you put less pesticide on. Remember to spray inward on the outside rows to avoid spraying into waterways. Prepare the air blast sprayer for work. And why do we bother? Well, faulty sprayers increase drift. Faulty sprayers waste money. Faulty sprayers pose a health and contamination risk. So in preparing the air blast sprayer for work, be very cautious about making adjustments. Think of your safety before you make any adjustments or you put your hands or legs anywhere near the rotating components. The fan has a mechanical gearbox with a neutral position. Put the gearbox in neutral so the fan remains stationary. Engage the handbrake when leaving the tractor seat so the whole rig doesn't roll away from you. When fitting the sprayer to the tractor, make sure the hitch pin is secure and the clip is in and the bottom of the hitch pin to keep it in the hitch. PTO shaft is securely attached. You put that 540 PTO shaft on the spline of the tractor. Make sure you hear that click and you shake it back and forth to make sure it is securely attached. All your protective guards on your drive line must be in place. Make sure the PTO shaft is aligned with the hitch during a turn. The geometry is important. If it's off, you could be putting undue stress on the drive line. Shut down the PTO during tight turns. Again, when that PTO shaft bends, it really stresses. You're best off turning the PTO off to make those tight turns. You can avoid mechanical problems with good maintenance. Check your sprayer hoses, your filters, the integrity of your spray tank, and the electrical and mechanical controls. Also, the operation of your sprayer pumps, the pressure gauge, nozzles, and sprayer calibration. Sprayer pumps should not be leaking, hoses should not be leaking, the tank should not be leaking. The pressure gauge must work. If the spray rig is shut down, but the pressure gauge reads 300 pounds per square inch, you know that pressure gauge is bad. The same as if the spray rig is operating and you know the pressure is up and this pressure gauge reads 0, you know you must replace the pressure gauge. Pressure gauges are cheap. They're very inexpensive and they're very, very important to monitor the condition and operation of the sprayer. Daily routine maintenance checks. Look at all your hoses, make sure they're intact and well secured, that all the controls work and move freely. The pressure gauge reads 0 when the machine is not in operation and the pump turns freely. The fan turns freely, drain plugs are installed, and valves are closed. Remember, especially the first time out in the spring, the drain plug may have been pulled from the bottom of the tank in preparation for the winter. Someone has to remember to put that drain plug back in. Make sure your tires are intact and properly inflated. You do not want to be in a distant orchard and have a flat tire with 500 gallons of spray in the tank. With sprayer calibration, the objective is to always apply the correct label rate of the pesticide to each acre consistently. And it's the applicator's responsibility to apply that labeled rate of the pesticide to the target safely and accurately. So for sprayer calibration, the sprayer is set up to apply a set number of gallons per acre. And the number of gallons per acre applied is a compromise between the volume of the tree canopy, the need for thorough coverage, and the time available to cover the farm. The difference between the volume of water per acre required to soak the tree and the actual amount of water applied per acre is called the concentration factor. The concentration factor is used by the consultant and certified applicator to determine how much of a pesticide to add to the tank. So as an example, if the tree is a large tree and it requires 300 gallons of water per acre to spray that tree to a drip, but you apply 100 gallons per acre to the tree, that's your calibration, then you're spraying at 3x concentration. To get good coverage, it's not always necessary to soak the tree to drip if the sprayer is calibrated properly for a concentrate application and the sprayer is working properly. But what could possibly go wrong? Well, how about you select the wrong gear? Maybe you're too slow and a 5-acre tank runs out in 3 acres. Perhaps you're in the wrong gear too fast and a 5-acre tank covers 7 acres. Or you're running the tractor at less than the 540 PTO speed. So in our first example, if you're in the wrong gear and too slow, you're putting on a lot more pesticide than you're supposed to be. On the second example, if you're in the wrong gear running too fast, you're putting on less pesticide than you're supposed to, and maybe the pesticide won't be effective. Pump failure. Mechanical machines break down. Electronics fail. The pressure regulator can fail. Broken hoses and leaking tank. You must constantly monitor the condition of your equipment. The certified applicator needs to inform you of how many acres or rows each tank must cover and report any differences to your supervisor immediately and before you apply the next tank. This is very, very important. It's absolutely necessary that the proper amount of pesticide be applied to the target in order to protect the environment and for it to be an effective application. With that, please be safe out there.
Welcome to our orchard. This may be your first time working at an orchard, or you may have many years of experience. Either way, it's clear that each orchard is different. However, our goals are the same everywhere. We all wish to provide a quality product for our customers, whether they are a commercial packing business or simply folks shopping at our market. And by working together, we can do it as safely as possible. The Worker Protection Standard, or WPS, is a regulation issued by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, that your employer must follow to help you be safe while you're working here. You should follow your employer's instructions. This video will tell you what to expect from your employer, and we will talk about easy steps that you should take to keep you protected from pesticides, where they may have been used and where their residues may be present. And that's why you're watching this program. There is little need for you to be concerned about your health and safety while you're here, as long as you follow the safety steps we'll be discussing. If you have any questions, make sure to ask your supervisor or the trainer who is here today. They're here to help you do your best work and to keep you out of harm's way. Ready? Good. Let's start with a couple definitions. Here at the orchard, most of you will be considered either workers or handlers. Workers are employees who do hand tasks in crop areas, such as cultivating, pruning, and harvesting. Most often, workers will be exposed to pesticide residues from contact with soil or plants. Exposure can also occur due to drift from nearby applications, or even from water with pesticides in it that's used to irrigate crops. Workers and handlers might also be exposed to pesticide residues that can be found on tractors and other machinery, including chemigation equipment. These residues might not be visible, so just because you can't see them does not mean that they are not there. Handlers are employees who are responsible for mixing and loading pesticides, applying pesticides to crops, or cleaning and repairing pesticide application equipment. Handlers are more likely to be exposed to pesticides directly as they mix and apply the products, and must use extra caution in their tasks to limit that exposure. Employers are not permitted to use workers to mix, load, or apply pesticides, or even assist in applications unless they are trained as handlers. The first part of our program applies to both workers and handlers, while the second part is strictly for handlers. While you are watching this program, feel free to ask any questions you may have about this information. Afterward, you'll be required to sign a form that says you took this training. Again, don't hesitate to ask any questions you have about this information. It's for your own safety. If you wish to have a copy of the form once it's signed, your employer must provide one to you free of charge when you ask for it. The WPS training here at the Orchard is required each year and will most likely be the first thing you do as an employee, no matter how long you've been employed here. Even when using DVDs like this one, your trainer is required to be here to answer any of your concerns or questions. Trainers need to be qualified, and the information has to be presented in a way that you can understand it. A couple more definitions you'll need to understand are pesticides and exposure. Pesticides are chemical materials, either synthetic or organic, used to control or eliminate various pests. Pests can be insects, weeds, mold, fungus, or rodents, anything that can damage our plants or crops. Pesticides, when used correctly, are effective tools in the battle to grow and produce quality crops. Because exposure to pesticides can make you sick, you should understand how they can enter your body and how you can reduce your exposure to them. It's important to follow the safety steps we will talk about today when it comes to the possibility of pesticide exposure. So, how can we be exposed to a pesticide? How does it enter our body to make us sick? Exposure can happen from contacting a plant that has been treated. Most often, it occurs through contact with your skin or from touching your eye. You can be exposed by breathing in particles of dust or from drift. On rare occasions, people have consumed pesticides by eating or drinking them. Most exposures can be prevented by washing your hands thoroughly whenever possible, especially when you have been working with plants that have been treated. You should use the water, soap, and towels that your employer has to provide near your work area to wash when you leave the treated area. This is most important before you eat, drink, smoke, or put anything in or near your mouth or eyes. It's important, too, to wash your hands before you go to the bathroom. Pesticides from your hands can get on your sensitive skin and can be easily absorbed. Something else to be alert for are your employer's instructions for areas to stay away from. When pesticide applications are taking place, your employer must not direct you to enter the area being treated or to be near the application equipment. The only persons allowed in an area during an application are appropriately trained and equipped handlers involved in the application. For applications that have already taken place, your employer is required to notify you of those applications by posting signs, like this one, or by telling you about the application. When you see this sign, do not go into this area until it comes down. It is not safe. The sign should look like this. It has a grim man with his hand up on a red background and a black circle around it. There might be a time when you are working in the crop area when a pesticide application is going on nearby. Even if you are outside the area being treated and the application exclusion zone, pesticide drift might move over the area that you are working in, and you need to leave that area immediately so the pesticide cannot contact you. Even if you know that they are low toxicity pesticides, you do not want to allow contamination. Over time, even low toxicity pesticides can harm you. Sometimes you can develop sensitivity to pesticides even with low-level exposures. Each pesticide carries potential hazards from exposure for workers, handlers, and their families, especially to children and pregnant women. These hazards can include acute effects, or effects that happen quickly during or after exposure. Some examples are dizziness and rashes. Delayed effects, symptoms that may take some time to develop long after an exposure. Chronic effects, effects that happen as a result of small exposures over a long time period, perhaps as long as 10 or 20 years, including cancers and birth defects. And sensitization effects. These are symptoms, often a rash or breathing problems, that show up once your body has reached a certain level of exposure. This central location is where you can find information about how to do your work safely around pesticides. It must be at a location that you can access during regular hours. The pesticide application records will include the EPA registration number, active ingredients, the location and description of the application area, the day and time of its application, and the length of the REI, or restricted entry interval. This REI is the amount of time that must pass before it is safe to re-enter an area after it's been treated with pesticides. In addition to pesticide application records, you should also have access to the safety data sheets, or the SDS, at the central location. The SDS have information about the hazards of pesticides used where you work. You'll also find pesticide safety information probably on a poster similar to this. Besides the reminders about ways to reduce your exposure, there will be contact numbers and addresses for an area hospital or medical center, along with the contact information for the state lead agency, which in Pennsylvania will be your regional Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. You can use the phone number for the state lead agency to report pesticide or WPS violations. Your employer must inform you where to find this information at the central location. You should make sure you learn its location right away. We talked earlier about washing your hands and the important role it plays in protecting you from pesticides. But what happens if you find yourself too far away from the main wash house, decontamination site, or a bathroom, and you come into contact with pesticides? Under the WPS, workers must have access to at least 1 gallon of water for washing, soap, and single-use towels within a quarter mile of the crop area they may be working in when it has been less than 30 days since the last restricted entry interval expired in that crop area. Do not use irrigation water to wash with, as it might have pesticides in it, and definitely don't drink irrigation water. For handlers, the owner is required to provide at least 3 gallons of clean water, soap, and single-use towels at the mix and load site, as well as the area where they remove personal protective equipment and within a quarter mile of any application area. When you are done with work at the end of the day, wash thoroughly before going home. This is especially important for handlers. If possible, handlers should shower and change into clean clothing before going home. No matter what job you perform at the orchard, if it must wait until you get home, make sure to shower and change into clean clothes as soon as you can. You should also avoid contact with your spouse or children until after you've showered and changed. Remember to take your work shoes or boots off before entering your home. There are additional ways that you can keep your family safe from being exposed to hazardous pesticides. Never take used pesticide containers home from work. No matter how well you feel they've been rinsed or how clean they appear, these containers are not safe to be used for any purpose. Even the smallest amounts of pesticide can make you or your family members very sick if you were to drink from one of these jugs. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is another way to protect yourself from pesticides. If you handle pesticides, it is necessary for you to wear PPE as described on the product label. PPE may include coveralls, special gloves, chemical-resistant boots, eye protection, and even dust or respirator masks to protect handlers when they are handling pesticides. Most workers will never need PPE unless they are part of an early entry group that is directed to work on a specific task in a treated area where the REI is still in effect. These workers must receive additional information and protections from their employer, which may include PPE. Early entry is only permitted for a few specific exceptions under the WPS. These workers must be provided with PPE if required by the label for the duration of time to complete their assigned task. Do not take PPE home with you. Your employer must provide, maintain, and clean PPE. Dispose of damaged or heavily contaminated PPE. Like the pesticide containers, PPE may carry residues and should never be used in a home situation. If exposed, these residues can be particularly harmful to children because of their smaller body mass, as well as to pregnant women. Clothes that have pesticide residues on them can transfer those residues to your skin. Work clothes that you wear to protect yourself from skin exposure should include long pants, long sleeves, and shoes with socks. These should be clean when you arrive for work each day. It is smart to keep your work clothes separate from the rest of your family laundry. Whoever handles the family laundry can wear gloves to help protect themselves from residues on clothing, or should wash up after handling the laundry. Your work clothes should be washed in the hottest water possible. Then it is best to dry those work clothes by hanging them outside to dry in the sun. Early entry workers must first be shown what PPE they need and how to put it on and off. Their employer must also tell them under what exception to the REI that they are going in under, what their duties will be, and what limitations they are under. All early entry workers must be at least 18 years of age. We'll discuss more about handlers' responsibilities and PPE in the next part of our training. Occasionally, and in spite of everyone's best efforts, accidental exposures to pesticides can still occur. If you believe you have been exposed, but you don't have any symptoms, wash off as soon as possible. If your clothing has been exposed, take it off immediately and wash yourself thoroughly. Again, shower if possible. Be careful when removing your clothes to prevent getting pesticides in your eyes, face, or mouth. In case of an extreme situation and when there is no other option, a nearby stream or pond may be used for an emergency decontamination. Make sure you wash thoroughly as soon as you can, wash your hair too, and put on clean clothes. If you get pesticides in your eyes, be sure to rinse them with clean water as quickly as possible to minimize possible long-term damage. If only one eye has been exposed, make sure to rinse that eye without contaminating the other eye. Rinse the affected eye for at least 15 minutes and then seek immediate medical care. If you have been exposed to a pesticide, you may have a headache or feel nauseated, feel dizzy, lightheaded, have a rash, or sweat more than usual. If you start to feel ill, the first thing you should do is notify your supervisor to ask for emergency assistance. Your employer must provide transportation for you to a medical facility and will be required to provide the EPA information about pesticides you may have been exposed to. Your employer must provide the SDS and the application and exposure information to the treating medical personnel. The SDS sheet at the central location will give first aid instructions. If you think you may be experiencing heat stress, try taking a few minutes in a safe, cool, or shaded area and get something cold to drink, preferably water. Loosen your clothing and/or your PPE and get as much fresh air as possible. Try to have someone stay with you until you feel better. It's possible that you could find a coworker who's not feeling well or may even be unconscious because of a pesticide exposure. That person should be taken to a medical facility as soon as possible. Again, your best response is to get help from your employer immediately and to get the injured person to medical care. Be careful not to contaminate yourself. It is important that a person with proper training take care of the sick person. We can't emphasize enough that being alert and paying attention to assignments and the provided pesticide application information is the smartest way to stay safe and healthy on the job. If you need the pesticide application information or the safety data sheet, but you are not able to obtain it, ask for it from your employer. You may also designate a representative to ask for that for you. To do that, you must put in writing your name, your signature, the date of the designation, dates that you need the records from, and the name of your designated representative and their contact information, plus a statement that designates that person as your representative. The document must include a description of the specific information being requested to include the dates of the requested records and the type of work you were doing then. That designated representative must then give that to your employer. Well, that's about it for now. Let's take a quick look at the basic points we cover today. The WPS, or Worker Protection Standard, is a regulation developed by the Environmental Protection Agency that helps to keep you safe and healthy at work by requiring your employer to provide information and supplies related to minimizing your exposure to pesticides. You will be trained every year to be taught or reminded about the safety elements provided, as well as your responsibility to understand and apply the information you've been taught. Your employer will provide a central location at work where you can read and learn all about the pesticides in use, where and when they've been applied, information about their active ingredients, as well as contact and address information for the closest medical center or hospital in case of an exposure. In addition to the safety data sheets, pesticide labels can provide information related to their safe handling, as well as signal words and basic first aid information. Protect yourself and your family by paying attention to signs and areas of potential exposure. Keep children and non-working family away from pesticide-treated areas. Don't use pesticide containers for anything other than storing pesticides properly. Keep your work clothes separate from regular family laundry. Wash thoroughly at the end of the day or shower and change into clean clothes either at a wash station or at home before coming into contact with your spouse or other family members. If you think you've been exposed to pesticides or see someone else who has, get help from your supervisor immediately. They will be able to determine the best way to treat the situation. Don't try to help someone who may be unconscious. Let those who are trained and wearing the proper PPE handle the situation. Most employers are fair and concerned for your safety, but just in case, your employer cannot retaliate against you for wanting to follow the WPS or for reporting pesticide violations. Once more, there's little reason to be afraid at work, but there is a great value in being alert and understanding how your own actions can keep you safe and healthy at work today and every day. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or concerns about the information we just shared, now is the time to ask your employer or the trainer. Get the answers you need in order to do your job safely and to the best of your ability. Have a great day. If you've been asked to view this pesticide safety training video, it means you've been chosen as a pesticide handler at the orchard. While you are watching this program, feel free to ask any questions you may have about this information. Even when using DVDs like this one, your trainer is required to be here to answer any of your concerns or questions. There are specific responsibilities and challenges in being a handler, but first things first, you need to be at least 18 years old, unless you are a member of the grower's immediate family. And if you haven't already watched the pesticide safety video designed for both workers and handlers, you need to do that before watching this video. As a reminder, handlers are employees that mix and load pesticides, apply pesticides, and even clean and repair pesticide application equipment. If you've seen that video, then you've already been taught how you can be exposed to pesticides at work and how they can enter your body. You know how to reduce your exposure by wearing work clothing to protect you from residues and using decontamination supplies that must be provided for you. You've also been shown the information displayed at the central location, the application information, the safety data sheets that provide hazard information about the applied pesticides, and the safety poster there. You've been taught steps for routine decontamination and how to decontaminate in an emergency. The word handler indicates the responsibility you have with pesticide products. It's critical to understand the particular products you are working with and the correct ways to use, transport, store, and dispose of them. Proper training, preparation, and understanding and following label directions are valuable in making every day a safer one. Because handlers are exposed to pesticides directly, they must be better prepared and properly protected in order to reduce the possibility of breathing in pesticides or coming into direct contact with undiluted materials. That's why it's critical for handlers to read and understand the information on the labeling of every pesticide that they work with. Some of the important information you'll find there includes the product name, ingredients, and the type of pesticide it is. Knowing what you're working with and its proper usage are the first step in any application process. You'll also find signal words and symbols on the label to help you understand how dangerous improper usage or accidental exposure can be. Caution indicates the least toxic pesticide, but it can still be an irritant or make you sick if you come in contact with it. Warning is used for pesticides that can cause moderate irritation or damage to skin, eyes, or any other part of the body exposed to it. The word danger indicates a highly toxic pesticide product that can cause irreversible damage and even death when exposure occurs. It is often accompanied by the word poison on the label to indicate its elevated threat to your health. Another section of information relates the product's directions for use. This will give you instructions on how to properly apply the materials. Closely following these instructions according to the label is critical in keeping yourself and others safe. You'll also find contact information for the manufacturer on the label. This will be helpful if you have additional questions about the product that may not be clear to you simply by reading the label or the safety data sheet. The pesticide label will also show the EPA registration number. This number can be critical in case of accidental exposure. In addition, the product label includes first aid and may have spill cleanup instructions. Your employer is required to make the label available to you while you are handling pesticides, and to make sure you have read or understand the label information regarding safe use. Having a clear understanding of the products you're working with and their proper handling will go a long way toward keeping everyone at the orchard safer. In addition to access to label information and understanding how to safely use the product, another way to minimize exposure is by wearing PPE, or personal protective equipment. You must wear the PPE that are listed on the label for the specific handling task you perform. This can include gloves, boot covers, full coveralls, aprons, eye protection, or even a full respirator mask. Your employer must provide you with the label-required PPE. It must be clean and it must fit properly and be in working condition. Your employer must ensure PPE is worn, maintained, and stored correctly, and must provide a clean place for you to keep your street clothes and a clean area for removing PPE. If a pesticide label requires coveralls, this means that cloth or fabric coveralls are acceptable, and chemical-resistant suits, such as Tyvek, are not necessary. If a handler chooses to wear a chemical-resistant suit, he will not be required to wear the layer of clothing specified on the label, such as long-sleeve shirts and long pants, under that chemical-resistant suit. Keep in mind, PPE alone cannot prevent all opportunities for pesticide exposure. Proper hygiene, such as washing thoroughly with soap and shampoo after pesticide application or potential exposure, is an important part of minimizing negative health effects. After your work activity, proper removal of used PPE is critical in minimizing contact with residues. Remove PPE as soon as you complete the job that required it. First, wash your disposable or reusable gloves with soap and water. Then remove other PPE while still wearing the gloves. Then wash the gloves again with soap and water before removing them. Clean reusable PPE according to instructions provided by the PPE manufacturer or your employer without contaminating yourself. Wash regular work clothes that have been exposed to pesticides properly. Wash them separately from other laundry with detergent and hot water. Dry outside in the sun to help destroy any remaining pesticide. If the pesticide you are to use requires a respirator for the task, your employer must provide you with a medical evaluation to make sure you can safely wear the respirator, a fit test to make sure the respirator protects you, and training before you wear the respirator. The first step is a medical evaluation performed by a licensed medical professional. This doesn't necessarily mean a medical physical, but does involve a series of specific questions aimed at determining a handler's health and safety while working with a respirator on. If your answers indicate you have any of the medical conditions, a medical exam may be necessary, but will not necessarily exclude you from respirator use. This evaluation may need to be repeated. The second step is the fit test itself, which your employer must provide for you. This can be conducted by any person who uses the OSHA procedures to ensure that the respirator fits your face shape so it provides the necessary protection when you wear it. Fit test services are often easily available from area providers, and easy-to-use kits are available from several safety catalog or online services. You must use the same make, model, style, and size of respirator while applying the pesticide that you wore for the fit test. If your work requires a number of different types of respirator masks, then you must be fit tested for each one. Men with beards cannot safely wear a standard respirator mask because it won't seal properly. Instead, if a respirator is required by a label, they can comply by wearing a unit that covers their entire head, like this helmet-style unit. Handlers using equipment like this, such as a loose-fitting, powered air purifying respirator, won't be required to have a fit test. However, the medical evaluation and respirator training will still be necessary. If your employer cannot provide you with a mask that fits and protects completely, you cannot work with products requiring a respirator until you have one, because wearing the respirator is a label requirement. In addition to a proper respirator, regular visual or audio contact may be required with certain pesticides. For example, handlers applying pesticide products with the skull and crossbones on the label must be checked every 2 hours by sight or sound. Constant voice or visual contact must be maintained with handlers applying fumigants in enclosed space production areas. Working with the employer closely and coordinating proper pesticide applications based on label requirements and directions will produce the best results. Just as important is the employer's responsibility to notify workers of pesticide applications and areas that are under an REI, either verbally or by posting warning signs. All pesticide applications are to be documented with proper paperwork that is to be kept up to date in the central location. Your employer may direct you to perform these notifications. If so, always remember to properly post "Do Not Enter" signs like this one. They are required for outside applications of pesticide materials with an REI, restricted entry interval, greater than 48 hours, and for enclosed space applications with an REI greater than 4 hours. The label may require workers to be notified by posting signs and receiving oral notifications. In other situations, your employer can notify workers verbally. Again, following your employer's instructions and knowing when these signs need to be posted, for how long, and in which areas are critical in keeping your coworkers informed. The pesticide labels have all the necessary details on proper application and how long the REI lasts. We can't emphasize enough the importance of following pesticide label instructions. This is a critical part of keeping yourself and your coworkers safe, and the label is the law. Your employer is also required to notify workers who are at the orchard in advance of any application, so that they can be aware of any potentially unsafe areas. Your employer is responsible for posting of the application records, but they may direct you to record the application information and post it at the central location. Whether you are directed to do the record keeping or not, this information is critical to the safety of everyone at the orchard. During application, wind or other conditions may cause pesticides to land somewhere other than their intended target. This is called drift. As a handler making an application, you must make sure that each pesticide is applied so that it does not contact anyone who is not properly trained and wearing the appropriate protective equipment. Your employer will work with you to make sure you know how to safely and correctly use any equipment to minimize the possibility of drift. Workers must never be permitted to be in areas where drift may occur, and applicators must be aware of any potential exposure to workers and should suspend any application where people may be contacted. The only persons allowed in an area during an application are appropriately trained and equipped handlers involved in the application. The handler should also understand the Application Exclusion Zone, or AEZ, which is the immediate area around the application equipment, which moves as the equipment moves around the treated area. The AEZ should be free of people. This means any person except a trained and properly equipped handler. As a handler, you must suspend an application if people are in the AEZ. The size of the AEZ depends on the type and the height of the application. Application types such as air blast and aerial require an AEZ of 100 feet. Applications with lower drift potential, such as boom sprayers, require an application exclusion zone of 25 feet. Though the potential for drift is often a concern with applications involving mechanical sprayers, it can also happen where pesticides are applied using irrigation systems, a process we call chemigation. In addition to drift, handlers need to be aware of the potential for pesticide runoff or other environmental and wildlife hazards. The product label provides specific information under the heading Environmental Hazards. Improper applications or a spill during mixing and loading can create long-term damage to water, soil, and vegetation. The pesticide label will provide information about hazards to non-target insects, aquatic organisms, birds, and other wildlife. As a handler, you must be careful to follow the label to avoid damage to the environment and wildlife. Again, the most important thing you can do now is to know as much as possible about the pesticides that are used in the areas where you work. Your employer is required to provide information about each application and must explain the label to you if you cannot read it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You can even ask a coworker to help you get the answers to your questions. As mentioned in the previous program, pesticide exposure carries potential hazards for handlers and their families. These hazards can include acute effects, or effects that show up during or quickly after exposure. Delayed effects, symptoms that may take some time to develop long after an exposure. Chronic effects are effects that happen as a result of repeated, small exposures over a long time period, perhaps as long as 10 or 20 years. And sensitization effects are symptoms that show up once your body has reached a certain level of exposure. If you believe you may have been exposed, you need to remove pesticide-contaminated clothing and wash off immediately. Find the nearest decontamination supplies and wash off the pesticide. Your employer must provide the following decontamination supplies: clean water, soap, and single-use towels at the mix and load site, as well as the area where you remove personal protective equipment and near where you are making an application. In an emergency exposure situation, if there is a pond or stream closer than the decontamination supplies, you should wash in those natural waters. If the label for the pesticide being used requires eye protection, the mix and load site must also have an eye wash system. Whether it's a commercial system purchased specifically or simply a clean, available water source from a garden hose, the eye wash system must have the ability to provide a gentle stream of water in case a pesticide gets in the eye. If that happens, flush the affected eye for at least 15 minutes and then get medical attention as soon as possible. These water supplies should be kept out of direct sunlight to avoid additional injury. As a handler, your employer must provide you a change of clothes such as coveralls or a chemical-resistant suit in case your work clothes become contaminated with pesticides. Another task that handlers may be directed to do is the transporting of pesticides from one location to another. There are some basic recommendations to keep safe while doing so. First, never transport pesticide materials in a passenger compartment or anywhere that people, pets, or livestock may be transported. Do not carry pesticides in the same compartment as food, animal feed, or clothing. Use the trunk of a car or the bed of a pickup truck, and make sure the containers are secure and won't roll around, fall over, or out onto the ground. Make sure the pesticide containers are in an upright position and that there are no cracks, leaks, or loose-fitting caps. Do everything possible to prevent any pesticides from escaping the container. If there are concerns about a container, talk to your supervisor before traveling. Upon arrival at your destination, again, make sure that the pesticides are stored safely and that the containers have not sustained any damage to cause leaking. Pesticides should be kept in a locked storage facility with access only available to those trained and prepared to handle them. It's a good idea to carry spill cleanup materials and PPE with you when transporting chemicals, and coordinate with your employer any cleanup steps or procedures related to each transport. Different chemicals will require specific spill cleanup steps and solutions. Read the product safety data sheet, or SDS, before transporting in order to be clear on specific cleanup details. If you do have a spill, think safety first. If you're not sure what to do, call for help and wait there until help arrives. Do not leave the spill area unattended. If you are going to clean up the spill and you are properly equipped, remember the 3 C's: control, contain, and clean up. Control. Control the source of the spill. Put the container upright. Shut off the equipment, or, if possible, put the leaky container inside another container. Contain. Stop the pesticide from spreading by using dirt or other absorbent materials to create a dike around the spill. Put up warning signs or caution tape to keep others out of the area. Clean up. Do not use water. Often this will dilute the product and actually spread the pesticide, making the spill worse. Soak up liquid spills with special sponges, soil, sawdust, clay cat litter, or other absorbent materials. Sweep the spill and clean up material into plastic containers or special drums. The label or the SDS may have disposal instructions for the spilled material. State or federal requirements may require spills to be reported. Your supervisor should be able to provide more specific information. After cleaning up a spill, you should wash thoroughly at the end of your shift. If possible, take a full shower with soap and shampoo at work, then change into clean clothes before you go home. If not, shower promptly when you get home and put on clean clothes. We talked in the previous program about the dangers of heat stress. Because handlers like you will be most often wearing PPE, sometimes in warm weather or in closed spaces like sprayer cabs, heat stress is possible. It's worth repeating that if you think you may be experiencing heat stress, try taking a few minutes in a safe, cool, or shaded area and get something cold to drink, preferably water. Loosen your clothing or PPE and get as much air to cool yourself as possible. Try to have someone stay with you until you feel better. Your employer is responsible for managing heat stress if you must wear PPE to protect yourself from pesticides. Remember, more detailed information about pesticides and other materials you work with can be found on the Safety Data Sheets, or SDS. Recent changes to requirements on how SDSs are written should make them easier to understand necessary hazard and emergency medical information about the pesticides in use. Your employer must display the safety data sheets for all pesticides that you may come into contact with. Your employer will tell you where the central location is on the orchard, where the SDS, application records, and safety information display with emergency contact information are found. Remember, there's no reason to be afraid at work. By selecting you as a handler, your employer places a serious responsibility in your hands. Always be careful when working around pesticides. Pay attention. Understand that there are risks to your health and the health of others, including your family. To protect yourself and others, follow the label, your employer's directions, and the steps we have talked about today to reduce exposure. You'll find that most employers are fair to their workers. Under the WPS, your employer cannot intimidate, threaten, or direct you to perform unsafe tasks in the orchard, or discriminate against and harass you if you refuse or if you attempt to comply with the WPS. If you believe that there are violations of the WPS taking place at the orchard, you can contact your state or tribal agency for pesticide enforcement listed on the pesticide safety information display at the central location. If you want a copy of the pesticide application information and safety data sheets, you can ask for them yourself, or designate in writing a representative to get that information for you. Talk to the trainer for how to designate the representative. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or concerns about the information we just shared, now is the time to ask the trainer. Get the answers you need in order to do your job to the best of your ability. Have a great day.
Welcome everybody. In this module, we're going to review the general rules for pesticide labels for the 2020 special permit training. In this module, we're going to review how you can read a pesticide label. We'll go over where you can find if it's restricted use or not, where you can find the active ingredient and the EPA registration number. We'll also review signal words and the hazards that are associated with humans and domestic animals. We'll also talk about first aid, personal protective equipment requirements, and re-entry interval requirements. We'll also talk about where on the label you can learn about the environmental hazards associated with the project, and also where you can find information on spray drift management. Throughout these examples, we'll use the Warrior 2 label. This is one of the products on this year's special permit lists. So when we look at the label, the first thing we'll look at is if it is restricted use or not. In this case of Warrior 2, we can see the restricted use pesticide box. This tells us that this product is federally restricted use due to toxicity to fish and aquatic organisms. In New York State, products will also carry this warning label, classified for restricted use in New York State under 6 ENYCRR Part 326. Next, we'll look at the active ingredient and the EPA registration number. In this case, looking at the EPA registration number, for Warrior 2, it is going to be 100-1295, and this information will be available on the front panel of the label. We can also find the active ingredient. In this case, it is lambda cyhalothrin. We can also find prominently displayed that Warrior 2 is an insecticide, and that we can also see in the upper right-hand corner It is also listed here as a Group 3 insecticide. Next, we'll look for the formulation of the product. In this case, on the front panel, we can see Warrior 2 is a capsule suspension. We can also see that this product contains petroleum distillates. When we talk about formulations, a good general rule of thumb is that emulsifiable concentrates, or EC formulations, tend to be products that contain petroleum distillates. ECs and all other products containing petroleum distillates can easily penetrate skin and are easily absorbed through the skin. These products can also cause rapid deterioration of any plastic and rubber. Because of these risks, these products pose greater risk to humans, and they also require that we use a greater degree of protection. Next, we'll talk about signal words. In the case of Warrior 2, the signal word is also prominently displayed on the front label. We can see it here as warning. When it comes to pesticides, we know that the dose is what makes the poison. Signal words are a good way for us to get a good idea about how dangerous, relatively speaking, a pesticide product is. The main signal words are caution, warning, danger, and danger poison, which will have the skull and crossbones. A caution pesticide is going to take a relatively large amount of pesticide to be ingested before it would kill us, whereas a pesticide carrying a warning on the label would take a moderate amount, and a danger material would take only a small amount of pesticide to be ingested for it to kill us. So again, remember, the smaller the dose needed, the more toxic or poisonous it is. So for our first practice question, which signal word indicates the most hazardous pesticides to humans? Is it warning, danger, danger poison, or caution? The correct answer is danger poison. When we look at the label, all labels will also bear the following warning. If you do not understand the label, find someone to explain it to you in detail. In your case, the best person to explain it to you is going to be your supervisor or the certified applicator leading this training. Next, we'll look at the directions for use section of the pesticide label. This portion of the label should give you much of the information that you need in order to safely apply this product. Again, at the top here, we can see that Warrior 2 is a restricted use pesticide, and it will also give us some other information. In this case, we see that it is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. Remember that the label is the law. We also see the label warns, do not apply this product in a way that will contact workers or other persons either directly or through pesticide drift, and only protected handlers may be in the area during the application. The label must also be in the possession of the user at the time of the application. In this slide, we'll talk about ag exclusion zones in regards to making a pesticide application. In this case, it is important to note that there is the immediate spray area around our spray rig, but there is also an exclusion zone in a larger perimeter around our spray rig. In this scenario, let's say we are spraying our field and there are workers in an adjacent neighboring field. We begin our pesticide application, but then notice there are workers in the adjacent field. We must therefore stop the application because there are workers there, and we must determine, can you ask them to move somewhere else until you are done with the application? In this case, we are able to move them out, and our application can continue with caution. Only once the application is finished does this ag exclusion zone no longer exist. Now we'll talk about why those ag exclusion zones need to be. For ground rigs like a boom sprayer, the ag exclusion zone is 25 feet. In the case of airplanes, air blast sprayers, or any other sprayer that creates fine droplets, it's going to be 100 feet around the perimeter of our spray rig. In this scenario, we're making an application to a field and a bicyclist comes within our ag exclusion zone. What should the spray operator do in this case? In this case, the applicator should stop spraying and continue spraying only once the bicyclist moves out of the ag exclusion zone. Next, we'll talk about precautionary statements. These statements tell us the general hazards that we can expect to humans and domestic animals. Pesticides can be fatal, may be fatal, harmful, cause substantial but temporary injury, cause moderate irritation, cause irreversible injury. They may be corrosive, and they may cause allergic reactions. And these can all be from different routes of entry, whether they be swallowed, inhaled, absorbed through the skin, or absorbed through your eyes. Precautionary statements will be found on the label in this section of the label. Here in the precautionary statements, we can see the hazards to humans and domestic animals, and we will also see the signal word again, in this case, warning. In the Warrior 2 label, prominently displayed, we will find may be fatal if swallowed, causes moderate eye irritation, and harmful if absorbed through the skin. In this practice question, what are the hazards to humans for Warrior 2 if swallowed? Is it harmful, may be fatal, or fatal? If we refer back to the precautionary statements, we will find that it may be fatal if swallowed. Also in the precautionary statements will be the user safety recommendations. In this case, we can see it here in this box on the label. Again, here you can see the user safety recommendations for Warrior 2. For Warrior 2, the user safety recommendations include washing hands before eating, drinking, chewing gum, using tobacco, or using the toilet. It also states that we should remove clothing immediately if the pesticide gets inside. We should then wash thoroughly and put on clean clothing immediately. It also tells us that we should remove personal protective equipment immediately after handling this product. We should wash the outside of our gloves before we remove them. And as soon as possible, wash thoroughly and change into clean clothing. For clothing, we should discard clothing and other absorbent materials that have been drenched or heavily contaminated with this product's concentrate. We should not reuse them. You should follow the manufacturer's instructions for cleaning and maintaining your protective equipment. If there are no instructions for washing, use detergent and hot water. You should also keep and wash your PPE separate from other laundry. You might also consider running your washing machine empty for another cycle before putting your other clothing into it again. The next part of the label we'll cover is first aid. All of the first aid information is going to be specific for each pesticide that you use, but there are a few general rules for first aid that should be noted for all pesticides. The label will have a large prominent box with first aid information for all the different routes of entry. Here we could see that larger. One thing to note is the hotline number for 24-hour medical emergency assistance. In case of an emergency, you should call 911 or you should call a poison control center at 1-800-222-1222. Or you can call the number provided on the pesticide label. Now we'll go through the first aid associated with the Warrior 2 label for each different route of entry. First, we'll walk through what you should do if you swallow it. If you do swallow a pesticide, you should call a physician or poison control center immediately. All labels will say, do not induce vomiting or give anything by mouth to an incautious person. Some labels will also say, do not induce vomiting unless told to do so by poison control center or a physician. Some labels will say, do not induce vomiting, and they may say, have the person sip a glass of water if they're able to swallow. If this is the case, remember not to give them carbonated beverages. The label might also warn, do not give any liquid, or the label might say to induce vomiting. If you do need to induce vomiting, these are some general recommendations. Have the person drink 1 or 2 glasses of water if the label indicates it's okay to give them something to drink. The person should then kneel forward or lie on their side. You should then put a finger or a blunt end of a spoon to the back of their throat. You should then collect a sample and go to the medical facility as soon as possible. Ipecac syrup is no longer recommended for inducing vomiting. Our next practice question. What should you do if Warrior 2 is swallowed? Induce vomiting? Do not induce vomiting. Have a person sip a glass of water. Do not induce vomiting. Do not give any liquid. In the case of Warrior 2, the label explains, do not induce vomiting and do not give any liquid. Next, we'll go through first aid if it gets in your eyes. If you get Warrior 2 in your eyes, hold your eyes open and rinse slowly and gently with water for 15 to 20 minutes. Direct the water across your eyes. Do not directly apply the water onto them. Do not contaminate your unexposed eye. If you wear contact lenses, you should start by rinsing them for the first 5 minutes, after which point you should remove your contacts and continue rinsing for the remaining number of minutes. You should also call a physician immediately. It's important to note that some concentrated pesticides can cause irreversible eye injury, so always wear the eye protection that is called for on the label. Our next practice question, how much water should be on site for an eye wash station? Is it 1 gallon for each worker? 3 gallons for each handler and re-entry worker? Or 6 gallons? In this case, it is 6 gallons of water on site for an eye wash station. Next, we'll talk about first aid if you inhale the pesticide product. If inhaled, you should call 911 immediately. You should also move the person to fresh air. The victim should lie down and be kept warm and quiet. Keep their chin up to keep their air passages open. If the victim is not breathing, you should begin artificial respiration without contaminating yourself. Again, call 911 or the Poison Control Center. Now we'll review first aid if on skin or clothing. If you get Warrior on your skin, you should remove contaminated clothing. You should then wash the affected areas with soap and water. You should rinse the area in running water for 15 to 20 minutes, and then get medical attention. For this product, you should not apply ointments, powders, or any other medications to the burns unless you're told to do so by a physician. An important note is that some pyrethroid labels say to apply vitamin E or oil-based creams on the contaminated area after you wash them with soap and water. Next, we'll talk about skin sensitization. On the label under the precautionary statements, we can read, skin exposure may also result in a sensation described as tingling, itching, burning, or prickly feeling. This onset may occur immediately to 4 hours after exposure and may last 2 to 30 hours without damage. In this case, you would wash the exposed area once with soap and water, and relief from skin sensation may be obtained by applying that oil-based cream.
So continuing on with the precautionary statement section of the label is personal protective equipment, which we often refer to as PPE. So I'm going to let you look at this section on your own, on your copy of the Warrior label, and I'm going to give you a practice question. So to see if you can read for yourself what PPE is required for applicators and other handlers of Warrior 2. Long sleeve shirt and long pants. Yes. Yes. Do you need to wear shoes plus socks when handling Warrior? Yes. Protective eyewear? Yes. Coveralls? No. Not required by the label. Chemical resistant gloves, category G? Yes. And I will discuss what the different categories of chemical resistant gloves mean in an upcoming section. Do you need to wear a respirator with Warrior? Not required by the label. Chemical resistant apron for mixing and loading? Not required by the label. So the thing is, you are certainly welcome to wear more PPE than the label requirement. So if you want to wear coveralls and a respirator with Warrior, that is fine. You're not allowed to wear less. So if you wanted to wear short sleeves and shorts and be barefoot, no, that would be a violation of the label requirements for PPE. Okay, also in the PPE section is language regarding when handlers are using closed systems or are in enclosed cabs, that there is an allowance for the PPE requirements to be reduced or modified. So what we mean by a closed system is a mechanical transfer system, such as actually in the case of water-soluble packets. So you're not breaking open that water-soluble packet, you're throwing the whole water-soluble packet into the tank. So whenever there's a mechanical system in place so that you are not pouring the contents of a pesticide jug into the spray tank, you're not directly coming in contact, or there's no risk of you coming in contact with the concentrate. With respect to enclosed cabs, what we mean is that when you're inside the cab of a tractor or a sprayer, that it is preventing skin contact with the pesticides that are being applied outside of the cab. So if the window on the cab is open or missing or cracked, then that is absolutely not an enclosed system. Even so, most enclosed cabs on spray equipment do not provide adequate respiratory protection when applying pesticides that require a respirator. So we can prevent them from getting on our skin, but kind of tricky to prevent them from being breathed in. So when you are inside in a closed cab and you're spraying a pesticide, you need to wear a long sleeve shirt and long pants, shoes and socks, and the labeling specified respiratory protection. Unless the label requires a particulate filtering face piece respirator, which is what we used to call a dust mist filter or respirator. Those are the paper ones. They're not the ones with the big cartridges. However, the enclosed cab has to be has a properly functioning air ventilation system, which is used and maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's written operating instructions. So unless it is a brand new cab, we assume for the most part, the ventilation system is not up to par. And just by default, you probably should be wearing a respirator when you are in a spray cab, when the label requires you to wear a respirator. And that includes the dust mist filters as well. Okay, so what you have to do when you're in the cab, in addition to the respirator and long sleeve shoes and socks, you have to put all of the other required PPE inside a bag that is contained inside the cab. So your coveralls, your chemical resistant gloves, chemical resistant boots, protected eyewear, maybe an apron for mixing. All of that needs to be in the bag so that you can put it on when you need to go outside and be exposed to a pesticide treated area. Okay, all right, moving on to the directions for use section of the label, or what we call the ag use box, the agricultural use box. This is where the restricted entry interval is located. So I've blown it up here for you on the Warrior label. Restricted entry interval is the amount of time that must pass between the time of the pesticide application and when it is safe to go back into the treated area. So that's listed on the label. And then if you need to enter before the REI is up, the personal protective equipment that you would need to wear. So in this case, coveralls, chemical resistant gloves, category G, and shoes plus socks. So I'm going to give you a practice. Oh, no. So the ag use requirement box is also where there is any information regarding requirements for dual notification. So in addition to oral notification where your supervisor tells you what fields have been sprayed and that you're not supposed to go into, posted or physical warning or posted warning signs need to be at the entrance of treated areas. And this is the case for organophosphate and pesticides. So we'll see that with Laura's Ban Advance. And also with the new EPA regulations, any product that has a REI greater than 48 hours also requires physical field posting in addition to oral notification. Okay, so a practice question, reading your Warrior label. What is the REI? Does it vary by crop? Is it 24 hours? Is it 12 hours? Or is it 2 days? If you noted 24 hours, you are correct. Okay, switching back to finishing up the precautionary statements portion of the label with respect to the environmental hazards. So in this case, Warrior is extremely toxic to fish and aquatic organisms, and it is toxic to wildlife. This is also where the bee toxicity statements are included. So Warrior is also highly toxic to bees. Every label will also state, do not apply pesticides for use in agricultural crops directly to water or to areas where surface water is present. Do not contaminate water by cleaning of equipment or disposal of wastes. Basically, keep it out of the water. Every label says that. We're not going to go over that again. With respect to the environmental hazards of bees and toxicity to bees, many insecticides are toxic to bees either when exposed to direct treatment, so if you spray right over top of a bee, or to residues on blooming crops or weeds. So bees feed on nectar, on blooming flowers, whether it's an apple tree or a dandelion weed. So if the blooms were sprayed and then the bees come and feed on the nectar, they can be exposed to pesticides at that time. That's the residues of the pesticides. Some labels require application that does not allow drift to blooming crops if bees are visiting the treatment area. And some do not allow application if crops and weeds are blooming in the treatment area. So this is our symbol for that. Some labels do not allow application if bees are adjacent to the treatment area. So You may have an apple orchard that's not in bloom, but you've got weeds blooming at the edge of the field or adjacent to the field. You would not be technically by that label, you would not be allowed to be spraying the orchard at that time. So this is our coding of that information, which you'll find on your summary sheets when we get to the individual labels. On the neonicotinoid labels specifically, so for special permit training, we have Indigo and Leverage 360. There is additional language with respect to application restrictions in relation to bees. And I'll just go over this really quickly so we don't have to go over it again when we review these labels. For crops under contracted pollination services, and actually this goes for crops that are attractive to natural pollinators as well, so that would be your apple orchards, your cucurbits when they're in bloom. Do not apply this product while bees are foraging. Do not apply this product until flowering is complete and all petals have fallen off, unless the following is met. And that includes you notify the beekeeper within 48 hours of a planned pesticide treatment so that the bees can be removed or otherwise be protected. Or the application is made to the target site after sunset when bees are no longer active in the day. The application is made to the target site when temperatures are below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, again, when bees are not active. The application is made in accordance with a government-initiated public health response, or the application is made due to imminent threat of significant crop loss. Okay, moving on to container disposal. This is on a separate section in the label, often near the back of the label. And in a nutshell, what you need to know: do not reuse a pesticide container. Triple rinse it, puncture the container to ensure that it is not reused, and it should be offered up for recycling. It should be disposed of in a sanitary landfill. A lot of labels will say or by incineration, which means burning. In New York, we do not burn pesticide containers. We should be participating in a clean sweep program. Okay. Moving on to spray drift precautions. So I'm going to go over, and this is on your Warrior label, I'm going to go over the standard language with respect to spray drift precautions. So when we go through the individual labels, we can just point out any deviations from this standard language. So with respect to wind direction and speed, most labels will say, only apply this product if the wind direction favors on target deposition. Drift potential is lowest between wind speed of 2 or 3 miles per hour and 10 miles per hour. Interesting that you need a little bit of wind versus no wind at all. And I'll explain that in a moment. Do not apply when the wind velocity exceeds 15 miles per hour. So I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems to be getting windier and windier lately. So the windiest time of the day tends to be in the afternoon. So to target a time when wind speeds are less than 15 miles per hour in the morning or in the evening. Do not make aerial or ground applications into temperature inversions. Temperature inversions are favored by calm conditions, little wind, clear skies, and long nights. Normally, warm air rises, so the air that's at the surface, near the surface, is warm, and then it gets colder as you move higher up into the atmosphere. In a temperature inversion, the cold air is slipped down near the surface, and the warm air is trapping the cold air inside. So this is why this is when you have very calm conditions, and if you have 0 miles per hour and you spray during a temperature inversion, the pesticide could literally just be sitting there hovering over top of the crop, and then when the wind does pick up, it blows it off of the crop onto a non-target site. It's hard to tell if you have a temperature inversion. This is a very good visual if you happen to see smoke that, instead of moving up into the sky, is being trapped in that cold layer closer to the surface of the earth. And this is a picture of a real world situation that I saw in Leroy, New York in 2017. So if you were assigned to spray this field and you saw this where the smoke was clearly not rising, that would indicate this is temperature inversion conditions, and I would contact your supervisor and tell him you probably shouldn't be spraying. With respect to droplet size, the standard language is to use only medium or coarse spray nozzles for ground application, according to the American Society of Agricultural Engineers. And in conditions of low humidity and high temperatures, use a coarser droplet size. So basically, this is a chart that shows as pressure increases, different nozzle types will result in different droplet sizes. So if you're in the higher pressure category, you want to make sure that you choose that you're using a nozzle type that's going to give you coarse or medium nozzles, so that you don't result in increased spray drift. And of course, smaller, finer nozzles are more likely to drift than heavier, coarser nozzles. Wind speed must be measured adjacent to the application site on the upwind site immediately prior to application. That's not on all labels. We will point it out to you when the label specifically requires you to measure the wind speed. Nonetheless, not a bad habit to get into. Before you spray, measure the wind speed. For ground boom applications, apply using a nozzle height of no more than 4 feet above the ground or the crop canopy, whatever your target is. Once you get higher than that, obviously you're at a higher risk for drift. For air blast applications, turn off the outward pointing nozzles at row ends when spraying the outer 2 rows. And to minimize spray loss over the top in orchard applications, the spray must be directed into the canopy. Vegetative buffer zones, most labels will require a minimum of 10 feet of a vegetative filter strip of grass or other permanent vegetation between the field edge and the downward gradient of the aquatic habitat. And also they will state, do not apply by ground within 25 feet of an aquatic habitat, or basically water, some type of water. So a visual of that, this is actually the Alba Muck, where we grow a lot of onions and potatoes. I spent a lot of my time there. And in yellow here is a 10-foot vegetative buffer, which is not crop, not part of the field. This is weeds or grasses or whatnot. There must be 10 feet between the edge of the field where you're going to spray, and this is the big ditch. And then you need 25 feet between the edge of the sprayer and the aquatic, or in this case, the big ditch. So this will be your spray area. Okay, practice question. What is the standard language for spray drift reduction? Number 1, do not spray when wind speed exceeds, what is the magic number? 15 miles per hour. If wind speed is greater than 15, you should not be spraying. At least if it's a product that has specific spray drift precautions. Drift potential is lowest between wind speeds of what on the low end? 2 to 3 and 10. Do not spray into temperature inversions. How wide needs to be your vegetative buffer between the water and the spray area? 10 feet. And how far do you need to be from the spray area and the water, or the aquatic area? 25 feet. Spray brooms and ground rigs should be no more than how many feet from the crop canopy or the target area, which could be the ground? Yes, 4 feet. So when we go through the individual labels, we will let you know when they deviate from these general restrictions. And at the end of the day, the label is the law. We have provided summary materials for you to help you write your tests, but they should not substitute as a label. Christy again. So now that we have finished going through the general rules on all labels in a fair amount of detail, and you've taken a deep dive into all of the aspects of the label with a real Warrior 2 label, the next step of the training is to review the remaining 9 labels for special permit training using our summary sheets. And with the summary sheets, we use a lot of symbols to make it very easy for you to pull out and learn the relevant information that you need to know to handle these specific pesticides properly and safely. So first of all, I'm going to review the symbols that we use before we get into the labels. This is an international symbol for danger or poison, skull and crossbones. One thing that I don't think has been mentioned yet is that when you are using a skull and crossbones pesticide, that it is your supervisor's responsibility to check in with you every 2 hours, whether it's by phoning you, giving you a phone call, or a two-way radio, or driving by to see if everything's going okay, or sending someone to check in on you. Our symbols with respect to why a product is federally restricted use, or with the environmental hazards as part of the precautionary statements, part of the labels. This is our very simple, kind of rough looking symbol for humans. And it is also important to note that if something is federally restricted use due to toxicity to mammals or is highly toxic to mammals, that humans are mammals. For domestic animals, we chose to use a cow, but certainly in this category would be goats and sheep and pigs and dogs and cats, bunny rabbits, things like that. For if something is toxic to wildlife, we chose to use a raccoon symbol and a deer symbol. I don't think we have anything in our training that's toxic to birds, but nonetheless, there's a bird. A bee, something's toxic to bees, very straightforward. However, what's a little more complicated is our symbols, our diagrams, to illustrate very easily to you when you have to specifically avoid contact or drift to bees. So this first one over here is if the bees, is our symbol if the bees are in the treatment area and crops are in bloom. And then this is our symbol if both the crop and or the weeds are in bloom in the targeted treatment area. And then finally on the bottom, this is our symbol for if the bees are visiting the crop or the designated treatment area, or they are visiting adjacent to the treatment area. So if you wanted to treat an orchard, it was no longer in bloom, but there was a weedy area bordering that was with weeds in bloom that was bordering the orchard. If that label specified you were not supposed to treat when bees are visiting adjacent to the treatment area, this is our symbol for that. Okay, a fish, straightforward if it's toxic to fish. And this is our symbol for aquatic invertebrates, which basically means little insects and tiny little organisms that don't have a backbone. If it's toxic to aquatic organisms, a fish is also an aquatic organism technically. And then our symbol for oysters and shrimps, fairly straightforward. With respect to first aid, sip a glass of water or don't sip a glass. Don't give any liquid. Very straightforward. With respect to personal protective equipment or PPE, this is our symbol for wearing a long sleeve shirt and long pants, very rough. For short sleeve shirt and short pants, basically we just cut off the sleeves and cut off the pant legs. Kind of a rough symbol, but there it is. Shoes and socks, very straightforward. Chemical resistant boots, very straightforward. Coveralls, particularly for early reentry. So most of the labels just state the word coveralls, in which case Tyvek coveralls, disposable overalls, but also cotton overalls would suffice in this type of situation. If if we fill in the coveralls with gray and the label specifies chemical resistant coveralls, that means you specifically have to find something that is labeled for chemical resistance, not just your simple Tyvek reusable or disposable coveralls. This is our symbol for waterproof gloves, and alternatively, when they're filled in black, this means chemical resistant gloves, specifically category B2H. And we'll talk about that right now. So not all rubber or gloves are created equal. The different kinds of materials that are available are labeled at, and you have a copy of this in your handout. The different types of materials that PPE is made of. So we have barrier laminate, butyl rubber, nitrile rubber, neoprene rubber, natural rubber, polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, and Viton. So 5 different categories of chemical resistant materials. Note the thickness, greater than 14 mils. That's important to note. And then we have the different EPA categories. So earlier in the Warrior label, I think it was category G, chemical resistant gloves that you were supposed to wear. So the relative resistance of these different materials to these different categories is indicated with highly resistant, color-coded in green, which means that you need to clean and replace your PPE at the end of the day's work period. So they can provide all-day protection, just rinsing off the pesticides at rest period. Color coding in orange indicates moderately resistant. Clean or replace PPE within 1 to 2 hours of contact. In yellow is only slightly resistant, which means you need to clean or replace your PPE within 10 minutes of contact. So, better than nothing, but really, really, really not great. And in red means that they're not resistant at all. You may as well be wearing bare skin, or you may as well have bare skin and not have any gloves on at all. Do not wear this type of material when contact with this type of pesticide is possible. So barrier laminate are highly resistant to every single category. So when in doubt, you don't want to read all the labels, you can wear barrier laminate. They will give you all day protection against any different kind of pesticide you're ever going to come in contact with. The most common kind of PPE gloves is probably the nitrile gloves. And again, they must be greater than 14 mils. But you have to note that if the label requires category B or D or G or H, that these gloves are only slightly resistant. So better than nothing, but really not great. A little bit better for category D. So keep in mind that if we come across a label that's a B, G, or H, that your nitrile gloves are not going to give you all-day protection. If it's something that's B, you're going to have to wear barrier laminate. If it's a G or H, barrier laminate or Viton would be sufficient. This is our symbol for a chemical resistant apron, which is used for mixing and loading. This is our symbol for protective eyewear or a face shield. Some labels specifically require a face shield. Most of them are just protective eyewear. And I just wanted to point out that what we're referring to for pesticides is protective eyewear that prevents a pesticide from getting in from the top, from the sides, and the bottom. So even though something like this is marketed as a protective eyewear, it's not protective against pesticides. So even though they're much cooler looking, they in fact are not protective eyewear for the purpose of protecting you from pesticide exposure. For protection against overhead exposure, you could wear a hat, should have the brim pulled up on top. You don't want pesticide to run off of the head into the eyes. You don't want the pesticide to run off from the back of the hat into the back of your neck and down your back. You want to have runoff protection. And of course, a hood on a spray suit would suffice as protection, chemical resistant headgear. So I want to point out to you that a ball cap is not appropriate to wear when you are spraying because it absorbs pesticides. It's difficult to wash. Every time you put it on and touch it, you're recontaminating yourself. So do not wear a ball cap when you're spraying. This is our symbol for dust mist respirator, which now is referred to as a particulate filtering face piece respirator. So something that would look like this. However, now that we have the new regulations to have a respirator fit test, there's no way you're going to pass a respirator fit test with this type of a dust mist respirator, this paper type air. There's no way that this is going to give you a perfect seal. So in reality, what you're going to be wearing is a cartridge type respirator with the particulate filtering cartridges. So the same time cartridges that are in here are going on here, and this is going to fit you perfectly. And this is the respirator you're going to be fit with your test. You're going to pass your test for. Nonetheless, this is the symbol that we use for this dust mist respirator type. Alternatively, we have organic vapor respirators, which don't even come in the dust mist filters. They are always these face masks that have to be perfectly sealed, and the cartridges are these big, thick cartridges for organovapor. So again, that's our symbol for the organovapor respirators. We talk about engineering controls. When you're inside a cab of a sprayer, you don't need to be wearing your apron, you don't need to be wearing your eye protection, you don't need to wear your gloves or your boots. They need to be in the PPE bag. So that's our symbol for that. So now that we have gone through the actual warrior label as a demonstration fairly thoroughly regarding all of the general rules, the next part of the training, we're going to go through the individual labels using the handouts. So we've got 9 labels to go through, and we will also include some more practice test questions for you. We will explain to you how to answer basically every question that's going to be on your exam. These are not the exact test questions, but questions that are similar. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, what does on-site direct supervision mean? Does it mean that the supervisor must be at the site where you, as a non-certified handler, is working with pesticides? Yes, it does. Does it mean that the supervisor must be within voice contact of the non-certified handler when they are working with pesticides? Yes, it does. Are cell phones an acceptable form of within voice contact? No, they are not. Unfortunately, which is why we are doing the special permit training to alleviate the requirements for on-site direct supervision. The requirement for on-site direct supervision within voice contact is for federally restricted use pesticides, both federally restricted and New York State restricted pesticides, New York State restricted pesticides, all pesticides, including general use, or only federally restricted use pesticides when used in New York State. So I know this is a bit tricky and this whole thing is tricky, but yes, it is a state regulation on a federal use pesticide. So the first label that we're going to go through is DuPont Lanate LV, which we're just going to call Lanate. It is a carbamate insecticide. Its registration number is 352-384. The active ingredient is methamyl, and it is federally restricted use due to its high acute toxicity to humans. So do you remember what acute toxicity means? It means that it can cause a lot of damage within a short exposure time, as opposed to chronic exposure, which can cause damage over a prolonged period of time. So needless to say, it is poisonous. It's a danger poison pesticide, which means that what does your supervisor have to do? They have to check in with you every 2 hours when you're using a skull and crossbones material. For hazards to humans and domestic animals, these charts are color-coded. If you see red, that means that it's fatal or death may result. If you see orange, that means that bad injury may result, maybe not death, but pretty bad. Yellow would be moderate injury, and nothing at all would be not really too much of a concern. So we see red if swallowed. Yes, lanate may be fatal. It can kill you. Interestingly, it may also cause blindness if swallowed. And it contains methanol, which is a byproduct of moonshine, making moonshine. So that's why a lot of moonshiners back in the day were blind, because if their moonshine didn't go right and they drank it and it contained too much methanol instead of the proper kind of alcohol, it caused blindness. It is harmful if inhaled, may cause irreversible damage if it gets in the eye, and can be harmful if absorbed through the skin. It is poisonous. The symptoms of poisoning for lanate include weakness, blurred vision, headache, nausea, abdominal cramps, discomfort of the chest, constriction of pupils, meaning that the pupil gets very, very small, sweating, slow pulse, and muscle tremors. So if you recall from the WPS video that some of these symptoms can be the same for heat stroke, but if you recall, for heat stroke, you don't sweat, whereas with lanate poisoning, you sweat. So that would be an indication that somebody may have had pesticide exposure. And if that is the case, if swallowed, call the Poison Control Center immediately. This is the only label that states to induce vomiting. So have the person drink 1 or 2 glasses and induce vomiting. And also note, if they are unconscious, don't ever try to induce vomiting if somebody is unconscious. There's a note to the physician that that atropine sulfate is an antidote, so it could stop or reverse the negative effects of poisoning. So that's a really important, and do not use morphine, which is a common painkiller. So that is why you want to have the SDS or the label with you when you go to the hospital, because that information is right there. The quicker that can be administered, the less chance that the person is going to die. So with something that's so toxic and hazardous to humans, it's not surprising there's a lot of requirements for personal protective equipment. So the label states that applicators and others exposed to the diluted spray solution. So that means what's out of the jug plus water is what's in the tank mix, basically. Must wear long sleeve shirt and long pants, shoes and socks, protective eyewear, and chemical resistant gloves, category B. Mixers, loaders, cleaners, repairers of application equipment, and others exposed to the concentrate, which is straight out of the jug, must wear long sleeve shirt and long pants, socks with socks and chemical resistant footwear, so stepping it up a little bit, chemical resistant gloves, category B, protective eyewear, same as the dilute, but also a chemical resistant apron. Plus, you need to wear a respirator for exposure in enclosed areas, such as a greenhouse. You need to wear an organic vapor respirator. So that's with the big chunky cartridges. If you're just outside, you can wear a dust mist respirator. Once again, your dust mist respirator is going to be a cartridge type respirator, but it's not going to have those big organovapor cartridges. And for engineering controls, when you're in a closed system, you can reduce the amount of PPE that's needed, but you have to have all that extra stuff in the bag. However, in an enclosed cab, we don't trust the ventilation system is up to par. You need to be wearing a respirator. So, practice question. When spraying Lanate LV, do you need to wear a respirator in the tractor cab? Assuming the ventilation system is not maintained according to the manufacturer's instructions, which chances are it is, unless it's a brand new spray. So, yes. Yes! Now, what else do you need to wear in the cab? You know, your PPE may reduce, but you still need to wear shoes and socks, long sleeve shirt and pants. We know you need to wear your respirator. We just answered that question. All other PPE must be in the bag. So that's your chemical resistant gloves, your protective eyewear, your chemical resistant boots, your chemical resistant apron. That needs to be in the bag. So what if a spray nozzle is clogged and you need to get out of the cab? What do you do? Well, basically, you've got that PPE, you've got to put all that stuff on, your chemical resistant boots, your gloves, and this guy's wearing coveralls, your respirator, which you should already be wearing, your protective eyewear, and then you can step out into the treated area, repair the nozzles while you're wearing the PPE, and then you want to take that off before you get back in the cab, because you don't want to bring all that pesticide exposed PPE back into the cab. So whether you want to pull ahead a little bit when you're out of the treated area, whether you want to on the steps, just get out of your PPE, put it back in the bag, get in the bag so you're not contaminating the inside of your cab with pesticides. Okay, in the ag use box of Lanate, the re-entry interval varies by crop. It is 4 days for peaches, 3 days for apples and nectarines, and 48 hours for the other crops, which are mostly vegetables, so onions and cabbage, beans and sweet corn, etc., etc. Practice question. Does a warning sign need to be posted when Lanate LV is applied to apples? So you would have your dual notification would be indicated in the ag use box. Well, this is a bit, yeah, the answer is yes, you do. This is a bit of a trick question because it doesn't actually state on the Lanate label that you need dual notification, but with the new EPA regulations, anything that has an REI of greater than 48 hours requires posting at the field site. If you need to go in early, those are long re-entry intervals. Now you need to wear your coveralls, your shoes plus socks, your chemical resistant gloves, category B, and protective eyewear. The environmental hazards of Lanate, it is toxic to fish, aquatic invertebrates, and mammals. And there's a lot of things that fall into the category of mammals, including domestic animals and wildlife. So not surprisingly, Lanate is also highly toxic to bees. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds while the bees are foraging in the treatment area. This chemical is known to leach through soil into groundwater, so its use in areas where soils are permeable, particularly where the water table is shallow, may result in groundwater contamination. It also has a physical and chemical hazard. It is combustible, which means it can catch fire easily. Do not use or store near heat or open flame, including smoking. Keep the container closed and use adequate ventilation. All of these are good ideas for any pesticide anyway. You shouldn't be smoking while you are using pesticides or near pesticides. For spray drift management, all this label really specifies is to avoid gusty or windless conditions. And so that goes back to that temperature inversion where when you don't have any wind speed, there's nothing to move that pesticide into the crop, and it can just sit there in a cloud above the crop canopy. And then when the breeze does pick up, it can be moved off-site onto an off-target. But there's no specifics regarding wind speed, distance from the aquatic areas, or vegetative buffers for this label. Okay, lures being advanced. Now, the only use that we are allowed for special permit training is the 2EE recommendation for control of black stem borer in apples, because apparently there's not a lot of alternatives to Lorsban for controlling this pest, and Lorsban Advanced is being phased out in New York State. So DC didn't want us to be allowing all other uses. So this is the 2EE label, which states that the 2EE recommendation is subject to all use precautions and limitation imposed by the label affixed to the container. So this is what the label affixed to the container is going to look like. So it is EPA registration number 62719-591. The active ingredient is chlorpyrifos, and it is a federally restricted use pesticide due to its hazard to human and domestic animals. So this is another one that's also harmful to mammals like us. We are mammals. It's not a skull and crossbones. It's not a danger. It's a warning. So comparatively, you would have to ingest a lot more Lorsban Advanced than you would Lanate, because it's a warning symbol instead of a danger poison. If swallowed, it may be fatal. So with Lanate, it was fatal. May be fatal for Lorsban Advanced. Harmful if inhaled. Can cause moderate eye irritation if it gets in the eyes. It can cause irritation if it's absorbed through the skin, and prolonged or frequently repeated skin contact may cause allergic reactions in some individuals. For first aid, if swallowed, do not induce vomiting, do not give any liquid to the person. It contains petroleum distillate, and we do have a few products actually that contain petroleum distillates. And vomiting may cause aspiration pneumonia, which is basically an inflammation of the lungs and bronchial tubes. So it can cause more damage coming up as it did going down. So that's why you don't want to induce vomiting. You don't want to give any liquid. Again, there's a note to the physician that atropine is available as an antidote, preferably by injection. So that's why you want to have a label with you when you go to the hospital. The Personal protective equipment for mixers and loaders using mechanical transfer systems. So that's so when you're not coming in direct contact with the concentrate right out of the jug, you need to wear a long sleeve shirt and long pants, shoes plus socks, chemical resistant gloves category G, chemical resistant apron, and a dust mist respirator. Okay, so you're in. All other mixers, loaders, applicators, and handlers must wear long coveralls over long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves category G, chemical resistant footwear plus socks, chemical resistant headgear for overhead exposure, and a dust mist respirator. Mixers and loaders exposed to the concentrate. All of the above, plus the chemical resistant apron, and for the engineering controls, you can have the reduced PPE, but you still need to wear that respirator. We are assuming that the ventilation system is not up to par. So if it's a brand new sprayer, theoretically, you wouldn't need that respirator. So a practice question. Will nitrile gloves provide all-day protection against Lohr's band advance without washing? So to answer this question, you need to get out your EPA glove category chart. You want to locate nitrile gloves. You want to locate category G, and you will see that nitrile gloves are only slightly resistant to category G, which means you need to change them within 10 minutes. So they're certainly not going to give you all-day protection. So the answer is no. That's how you go about answering such a question on your exam. What kind of gloves will provide all-day protection without washing when using Lohr's band advance? So you would want to look at your chart, locate category G, and identify the categories are highly resistant that you can clean or replace at the end of a day's work, just rinsing off at rest periods. And you can see that includes barrier laminate and Viton. So the answer is barrier laminate and Viton. So not the typical nitrile gloves. In the ag use box, for apples, the re-entry interval is 4 days and dual notification is required. So both oral and field posting at the field entrance. If you need to go in early, the PPE requirement is coveralls over short sleeve shirt and pants. So they give us a little bit of a break from the heat of summer. Chemical resistant gloves category A this time, down from G. Still need to wear chemical resistant boots, and you still need to have chemical resistant headgear for overhead exposure. So, what types of chemical resistant gloves will provide all-day protection without washing for category A, which equals waterproof? So to answer this question, you identify category A, and you can see that all kinds of gloves are highly resistant, will give you all-day protection. So the answer is all of them. Barrier laminate, nitrile, Viton, neoprene rubber, as well as the other 4 different materials. So it's really easy to have PPE that is waterproof. There is a caveat though. What kind of glove does not meet EPA category A requirements? And the answer is nitrile gloves, or any gloves, latex gloves for that matter, that are less than 14 mils. So if you're using the 8 mil ones or the 4 mil ones, they are too thin and they will break. You need to have a minimum of 14 mil thickness. Yay! So that was a lot of rubber glove questions and practicing. You did a great job. I feel like celebrating. Good to get that out of my system. The environmental hazards for Lohr's ban. It is toxic to fish, aquatic invertebrates, small mammals, and birds. So we did have a pesticide that was toxic to birds. So pretty bad stuff. You don't want it in the water. You don't want to get it on humans. You don't want to get it on animals. So highly toxic to bees, not surprising. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds if the bees are visiting the treatment area. For spray drift management, now we only need to concern ourselves with the application for the black stem borer in apples, which is going to be made with a volume handgun or a shield or shielded spray equipment. And the label states to treat only the lower 4 feet of the apple tree trunk. The label does state that you do not apply when wind speed is greater than 10 miles per hour as measured by an anemometer. So our standard language is greater than 15 miles per hour. This is more constricted than that. They really don't want lures banned to drift because it's toxic to so many different things. Do not allow spray to contact foliage or fruit. It's really, really meant for the lower part of the tree trunk. Okay, moving on to AgriMech, and your trainer will be Janet.
Our next insecticide label, AgriMech, is a group 6 or avermectin insecticide. This kills insects and mites, and this is the only product that we'll be covering which is in this group 6 category of insecticides. The EPA registration number is 1001351. AgriMech is a federally restricted use pesticide because of toxicity to non-target invertebrates, mammals, and aquatic organisms. And when they say mammals, of course, they mean humans in that category as well. So this is highly toxic to humans also. The signal word on AgriMech is warning. And the hazards to humans and domestic animals, if swallowed, it may be fatal. And if inhaled, it also may be fatal. If absorbed through the skin, it can cause bad injury and be extremely harmful. And in the eyes, it can cause moderate eye irritation. So this is highly dangerous. If swallowed, of course, the first step always, if any insecticide or pesticide is swallowed, is to call Poison Control Center. And then after that, have the person sip a glass of water if they're able to swallow. With AgriMech, do not induce vomiting. A note to the physician, and this is why it's always important to have the label on you when you take any patient of pesticide poison to a physician, is so you can make sure to have these instructions with you. But a note to the physician for AgriMech is that toxicity following accidental ingestion can be minimized by early administration of chemical absorbents, such as activated charcoal. This is also a good reason why it's important to have something like activated charcoal in your first aid kit, so that you could also administer this even before getting the patient to a physician. And another note to the physician, early signs of intoxication include dilated pupils, muscular incoordination, and muscle tremors. So this can help to identify AgriMech poison in a patient. So the personal protective equipment that you need when applying AgriMech, applicators and other handlers must wear long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves in the category C, and shoes plus socks. In addition, you need engineering controls when using a closed system. And the restricted entry interval, the REI for AgriMech, is 12 hours, except for there's a longer reentry interval of 4 days for tasks such as grape girdling, cane turning, and tying in grapes. And that's because those activities require you to be more close to and more physically touching of the plant. So those activities require a longer re-entry interval in order to maintain safety. If somebody is required to enter an area after AgriMech has been applied before the end of that re-entry interval, if they need to re-enter early, the personal protective equipment for early re-entry is coveralls over short pants and short sleeve shirt, chemical resistant gloves in the category C, and shoes plus socks for any entry ahead of that 12-hour or 4-day re-entry interval. Environmental hazards of agromech: it is toxic to fish and wildlife, and the use of this product may pose a risk to threatened and endangered species of fish, amphibians, crustaceans, including freshwater shrimp and insects. In addition, agromech is highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds while bees are foraging in adjacent or inside of a treatment area. So even if the bees are beside the crop in another area, it's important to not apply this product when bees are present. In order to avoid spray drift, avoiding spray drift is the responsibility of the applicator, and the pesticide applicator is solely responsible for considering equipment and weather-related factors which may determine the potential for spray drift. In order to help you avoid spray drift, the agromech label specifically says, do not apply when wind speed is below 2 miles per hour. And that is to avoid that inversion situation where instead of descending onto the crop, the spray particles hang in the air and can move off target. And also do not apply within 25 feet of near aquatic sites. When using ground application to spray tree crops or hops in the vicinity of aquatic areas, there are specific additional requirements. In that case, do not apply within 110 feet upwind of aquatic areas. Do not apply when the wind speed is above 8 miles per hour, and spray the last 3 rows windward of aquatic areas using nozzles on one side only, with spray directed away from the aquatic areas. So that is specifically when spraying tree crops or hops in the vicinity of aquatic areas, there are those additional requirements. So a practice question: why is agromech SC a federally restricted use pesticide? Is it because it is toxic to fish and wildlife? Because it is highly toxic to bees? Because it may pose a threat to threatened and endangered species? Or because of its toxicity to non-target invertebrates, mammals, and aquatic organisms? The answer to this question is actually number 4. So this was a little bit tricky because answers 1, 2, and 3 are in fact accurate. Agromech is toxic to fish and wildlife, highly toxic to bees, and may pose a threat to threatened and endangered species. But those are not, in fact, why it is a federally restricted use pesticide. Those are just, or they are environmental hazards of this insecticide. But specifically, it's restricted use because of this toxicity to non-target invertebrates, mammals, and aquatic organisms. The next insecticide that we are talking about here is Danitol 2.4 EC. This is a group 3 insecticide, a pyrethroid, and it is toxic to insects and mites. The EPA registration number is 59639-35, and the active ingredient is fenpropathrin. This is again a federally restricted use pesticide due to its toxicity to fish and aquatic organisms. The signal word is warning. Danitol 2.4 EC may be fatal if swallowed and can be highly harmful or cause bad injury if inhaled, if it's in the eyes, or if absorbed through skin. In the eyes, it causes substantial but temporary injury, and on the skin, it can cause severe skin irritation. Some first aid for Danitol 2.4 EC if swallowed. As always, immediately call the Poison Control Center. Do not induce vomiting and do not give any liquid to the person. This product may pose an aspiration hazard, meaning that it may cause inflammation of the lungs and bronchial tubes. Diazepam has been recommended to reduce the side effects. of Danatol 2.4 EC. Personal protective equipment required for applicators and other handlers of Danatol include long-sleeved shirt and long pants, chemical-resistant gloves in the category G, shoes plus socks, and protective eyewear. A note here is that a ingredient in Danatol, one of the inactive ingredients, a petroleum distillate, can actually break down category G gloves, so they cannot be worn all day. So when applying all day Danatol, it's important to change out your gloves several times throughout the day so that they maintain effectiveness. The re-entry interval for Danatol is 24 hours, and if someone needs to enter early, personal protective equipment is required, including coveralls, chemical resistant gloves, again in category G, shoes plus socks, and protective eyewear. And again, if you'll be working in an area all day where you were entering an area that has been sprayed with Danatol within 24 hours, it's important to change out those category G gloves several times during the time that you're working there. So a practice question: why is eye protection needed when using Danatol 2.4 EC? Is it because eye protection is required when working with all pesticides? Is it because it may be harmful if inhaled? Or is it because it causes substantial but temporary damage if it gets in the eyes? The answer is, of course, 3. It causes substantial but temporary damage if it gets into the eyes. The environmental hazards, as we already know, Danatol is extremely toxic to fish and aquatic organisms. It is also toxic to wildlife. It's highly toxic to bees or other pollinating insects exposed to direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds if bees are visiting the treatment area. In terms of spray drift, there is especially strong language on how to manage spray drift for this product because of the high toxicity to aquatic invertebrates. So instead of the usual 25 feet distance from aquatic areas, with Danatol, it is a requirement of the label that there must be 100 feet between any area that you're spraying with Danatol and any aquatic area. This is a New York State restriction, and this is part of the label, and so it is the law. There is no maximum or minimum wind speed specified on the label, but wind speed must be measured adjacent to the application site on the upwind side immediately prior to application, and it still is important to use your best judgment when deciding whether to apply Danatol based on wind speed in order to avoid spray drift. The next insecticide that we will be discussing is Mustang Max. This is another group 3 insecticide, another pyrethroid. And this one also contains petroleum distillates. The EPA number is 2793426. And the active ingredient is zeta-cypermethrin. It is federally restricted due to the toxicity to fish and aquatic organisms. And the signal word is warning, aviso. Mustang Max is highly toxic and may be fatal if swallowed. It can cause substantial but temporary injury if in the eyes, and it can cause moderate injury if absorbed through the skin. Basically, prolonged or frequent skin contact can cause an allergic reaction. First aid for Mustang Max: if swallowed, immediately call the Poison Control Center. Do not induce vomiting and do not give any liquid to that person. Personal protective equipment for Mustang Max: all handlers must wear long sleeve shirts and long pants, chemical resistant gloves in the category F, shoes plus socks, and protective eyewear. And there are standard WPS specifications when handlers use closed systems. The re-entry interval for Mustang Max is 12 hours. And personal protective equipment that's required for early entry would include coveralls, chemical resistant gloves, either in category G or H, and shoes plus socks. A practice question. Do you need to wear clothes underneath coveralls for early re-entry after application of Mustang Max? Yes or no? The answer is yes, you do need to wear clothes underneath coveralls for early re-entry. Environmental hazards of Mustang Max. It is extremely toxic to fish, aquatic invertebrates, oysters, and shrimp. It is highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment or to residues on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops while bees are visiting the treatment area. Spray drift control requirements do not apply when wind speed exceeds 15 miles per hour. Maintain a 10-foot vegetative buffer and do not apply within 25 feet of aquatic areas. Wind speed must be measured adjacent to the application site on the upwind side immediately prior to application. These are the general rules for standard spray drift management and are required for all of these restricted use pesticides. The next insecticide is Asana XL, which is again a category or a group 3 insecticide, a pyrethroid. The EPA registration number is 352-515, and the active ingredient is S-fenvalerate. It is again federally restricted due to toxicity to fish and aquatic organisms. And the signal word is warning. Asana may be fatal if swallowed and is extremely harmful if inhaled. Do not get it in your eyes or get it on your skin. First aid if swallowed. As always, call the Poison Control Center. Do not give any liquid to the person and do not induce vomiting because a product in Asana, xylene range aromatic solvent, can cause aspiration pneumonia if vomiting is induced. If on skin, after drying, apply vitamin E cream or oil if available. And if those products aren't available, you can just rub vegetable oil liberally over the painful areas. Practice question. For first aid, what do you do if Asana XL gets on skin? Do you rinse it in running water for 15 to 20 minutes? Do you, after drying, apply vitamin E cream if available? Do you remove contaminated clothing? Or do you do all three of those? The answer is in fact 4, all of the above. Even though we did not specifically say this on the past slide, these are all good best management practices for what to do if you get a pesticide on your skin. Personal protective equipment. Applicators and other handlers must wear long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves in the category E, shoes plus socks, and protective eyewear. When handlers use closed systems, refer to the standard worker protection standards. The re-entry interval is 12 hours, and personal protective equipment required for early re-entry includes coveralls, shoes plus socks, protective eyewear, and chemical-resistant gloves in the category E. Environmental hazards. This pesticide is extremely toxic to fish and aquatic invertebrates. It's also highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment or residues on blooming crops and weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops if bees are visiting those areas. In order to manage for spray drift, Again, refer to the standard spray drift general rules, which would include things like do not apply when wind speed exceeds 15 miles per hour, maintain a 10-foot vegetative buffer, and do not apply within 25 feet of aquatic areas. As always, wind speed must be measured adjacent to the application site on the upwind side immediately prior to application.
All right, so our next product is going to be Indigo ZC. This is an insecticide, and it is a premix of a pyrethroid and a neonicotinoid. Its EPA registration number is 100-1276. Indigo ZC is a federally restricted use pesticide. Its active ingredients are a premix of lambda cyhalothrin and thiamethoxam. And it's federally restricted due to its toxicity to fish and to aquatic organisms. The signal word for indigo is warning. And if we look at the health risks of indigo, it may be fatal if swallowed, harmful if absorbed through the skin, moderate irritation if it gets in the eyes, and can cause skin irritation. First aid for indigo, if it's swallowed, do not induce vomiting and do not give any liquid to the person. The best thing to do for this one would be to call poison control. PPE for indigo, all applicators and other handlers must wear coveralls over short sleeve shirt and short pants, chemical resistant gloves in category G, chemical resistant footwear plus socks, a chemical resistant apron when you're cleaning equipment, mixing, or loading indigo, and chemical resistant headgear for any overhead exposure. If you have engineering controls in place, handlers using closed systems, you can use standard WPS. Ag use requirements for indigo, the re-entry interval is 24 hours, and the protective equipment for early re-entry, coveralls over short sleeve shirt and short pants, again those category G chemical resistant gloves, chemical resistant footwear plus socks, and chemical resistant headgear, again for any overhead exposure. So our next practice question, is it okay to wear a baseball cap for protection against overhead exposure? Is it yes or no? And the correct answer is no. A baseball cap is not going to protect you from that overhead exposure. Environmental hazards with indigo, extremely toxic to fish and aquatic organisms, and toxic to wildlife. Indigo is also highly toxic to bees that are exposed to the direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. So language on this product will tell you do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds while bees are actively foraging in or adjacent to the treatment area. And this product will carry the protection of pollinators label. Spray drift management for indigo, some deviations from the standard language. The wind speed must be measured adjacent to the application site on the upwind side immediately prior to application. And to do that, you can use one of these handheld wind speed monitoring devices. So another practice question with respect to bees, when should indigo ZC not be applied or allowed to drift? Is it when crop or weeds are in bloom when bees are visiting the crop? When crop or weeds are in bloom when bees are visiting the crop or visiting adjacent to the crop? Is it when crop is in bloom when bees are visiting the crop? Or is it for indigo ZC is not toxic to bees? And the correct answer is 2. So we cannot apply when crop or weeds are in bloom, when bees are visiting, or when they're visiting adjacent to the crop. The next product is Leverage 360. This is another premix pyrethroid and neonic insecticide. So again, you can see this is a premix group 3 4A. The EPA registration for Leverage is 2641104. The active ingredients in this product are imidacloprid, which is the neonic, and lambda cyfluthrin, the pyrethroid. And this product is federally restricted due to its toxicity to fish and aquatic organisms. The signal word for Leverage 360 is caution. Looking at its route of entry risks, it is harmful if swallowed, will cause moderate irritation if it gets in the eyes, and is harmful if it's absorbed through the skin. First aid for Leverage 360. If it's swallowed, do not induce vomiting. Instead, have the person sip a glass of water if they're able to swallow. And remember, never to give anything by mouth to an unconscious person. Personal protective equipment for Leverage 360. Applicators and other handlers must wear a long sleeve shirt and long pants, waterproof gloves in category A, and shoes plus socks. And as far as engineering controls go, when handlers use closed systems, you can follow the standard WPS protocol for PPE. Ag use requirements for Leverage 360. It has a 12-hour reentry interval, and anybody entering the site early would need to have the following PPE: coveralls, chemical-resistant gloves, barrier laminate or Viton in category G, and shoes plus socks. Our next practice question: what is the minimum age of an early re-entry worker? People entering the treated area before the REI. Is it 16 years old? 18 years old unless immediate family of farm owner? Is it 18 years old? Or is it unrestricted? In this case, the correct answer is 18 years old unless they are an immediate family member of the farm owner. Environmental hazards for Leverage 360. This product is extremely toxic to fish and aquatic invertebrates. It is also highly toxic to bees exposed to the direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. And again, we do not want to apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds if bees are visiting the treatment area. And this product will once again carry this additional protection of pollinator label. Spray drift management for Leverage 360. Refer to the standard spray drift management general rules, which again include: do not apply when wind speed exceeds 15 miles per hour, have a 10-foot vegetative buffer, 25 feet from aquatic areas, and apply at no more than 4 feet above the crop canopy. Practice question: what are the active ingredients in Leverage 360? Is it neonic and pyrethroid insecticides, lambda cyfluthrin, lambda and cyfluthrin, or lambda cyfluthrin and imidacloprid? In this case, the correct answer is that lambda cyfluthrin and imidacloprid. Our next product is Besiege, which is an insecticide. This is another premix of a group 3 pyrethroid and a group 28 diamide. And its registration number is 1001402. This product is federally restricted use due to its toxicity to fish and aquatic organisms. And the active ingredients in this product are lambda cyhalothrin and chlorantraniliprole. The signal word for Besiege is warning. The risks: hazards to humans and domestic animals, may be fatal if swallowed, harmful if absorbed through the skin, moderate irritation if it gets in the eyes, and can cause skin irritation or allergic skin reactions through prolonged or frequent skin contact. If swallowed, call Poison Control Center. Do not induce vomiting with this product, and do not give any liquid to the person. Personal protective equipment for besiege. Applicators and other handlers must wear a long sleeve shirt and long pants, chemical resistant gloves in category C, and shoes plus socks. For engineering controls, when handlers use a closed systems, they can use the standard WPS PPE. Ag use requirements for besiege, the REI is 24 hours, and any employees entering early would need to have coveralls, chemical resistant gloves in category C, and shoes plus socks. Environmental hazards with besiege, again, extremely toxic to fish and aquatic organisms. It's also toxic to wildlife and toxic to aquatic invertebrates, oysters, and shrimp. This product is highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds while bees are foraging in or adjacent to the treatment area. Besiege also carries some water advisories. There's a surface water advisory that this product may impact surface water quality due to spray drift or runoff from rainwater. Runoff may be reduced by avoiding application when rainfall is forecast within 48 hours. There's also a groundwater advisory that this chemical may leach into groundwater, especially when used where soils are permeable and the water table is shallow. Spray drift management for besiege. Standard spray drift precautions, which include not applying when speeds are in excess of 15 miles per hour, keeping a 10-foot vegetative buffer and a 25-foot buffer from aquatic areas, and applying no more than 4 feet above the crop canopy. A deviation from the standard language for besiege is that wind speed must be measured adjacent to the application site on the upwind side immediately prior to application. That concludes the label review portion of the special permit training. The next part is going to be to take the written exam. Before you do so, we'll give you some quick instructions for it. You must pass the written exam to receive your special permit. The exam is 20 multiple choice questions. And in order to pass, you're going to need a minimum score of 70% or 14 correct answers. Your supervisor must ensure that you do not cheat on your test, but you may use your packet as a reference during the test. Each question is going to have only one correct answer, and ensure that your name and farm name is on the test paper correctly. Good luck on your exam, and spray safe this summer.